from the military forces, and also university professors in the area of law to prepare in the professional legal area, because we have to become prepared, all of us, in order to be prepared, well, very well prepared in international military field and human rights. This is a fast presentation that we have today, very productive, and we are in Brazil at the course is at your disposal. It is open for all of the foreigners that want to participate in the course, and is the only one that has officers and lawyers from the Inter-American Defense Board, so everybody can participate. Thank you very much. We should now start with the first panel in charge of the moderator, Dr. William Kodnick. Dr. William Kodnick is business postgraduate in the studies in the United Kingdom. So it was nearly a decade as coordinator of the program of public security, the Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament and Development of Latin America and the Caribbean, with a seat in Peru. He obtained a master's in the State University in San Francisco, in the International Politics at the Institute of International Studies of Monterrey. Also, at this time, he will be accompanied by Dr. Elisa Zaceda, who carried out his doctorate in law with a postgraduate in, in the Unified Center of Teaching in Brasilia and a Master of Naval Sciences. He is a member of the Technical Committee of the Brazilian Academy of International Law and of the Brazilian Association of Defense Studies. Currently, he is advisor of the Minister and Director of National Information School and Training of Military Justice in La Unión. He will also be accompanied by Dr. Marco Lopez Conejo, doctor in law by the University of Chile. He's a lawyer and has a doctorate in law with more than 30 years of professional experience. He is a member of the Artificial Intelligence Center and Digital Policy from Washington, D.C. He's a professor of Introduction to Law on International Artificial Intelligence at the School Postgraduate School of the Faculty of Law of the University of Development in Chile, and Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Medina Diaz, Masters in Military Sciences in the Higher School of War of the Army in Peru. Currently, he's a Deputy Director and Head of the Academic Department at the Center of Humanitarian International Law and Human Rights of the Armed Forces. He's also the Deputy Director of the Communication Schools of the Army of Peru. He has carried out a course of electronic war at the Communications School from Peru and the course on human rights implication and the rule of law at the Inter-American Defense Board. We wish to invite Dr. Conley and Dr. Lopez, who are present in Washington. Before starting with this first panel, I wish to say, dear audience, we inform you that the data, information, opinion, and comments with all of the speakers reflect opinions are responsibility. They do not express explicitly the opinion of the Inter-American Defense Board. Dr. Poli, the floor is yours.
Good morning. In regular times, I am a dean of the Perrier Center of National Defense, but today I am here as an expert in humanitarian aid and human rights. And I thank General Haycom and General Salgado for allowing me to have this space. My main work today in this panel, with a forehand, I apologize if at any times I ask you to finish your presentation because we don't have enough time, but the idea is not to say everything, but just to share some main ideas in order to provoke a debate with the people who are here as well as with the people who are online. Only two comments before we open up for Dr. Perez. In the first place, it is not a secret that today we are in a crossroads in the world of security and defense, looking at the severity and profundity of the challenges presented by the threats and the stakeholders that are facing these big changes. So in the humanitarian law is challenged not just by the principles but the mechanisms. And in the second place, with all the technological changes, we have the responsibility of understanding if the technological changes are, if we can adapt them within the existing frameworks, or if it is necessary to generate new frameworks in order to face these new changes in technology. And you can help us to dive deeper into this. So for the first presentation, I'm going to invite on the screen Dr. Alexandro Perez to talk to us about artificial intelligence. And beforehand, I'll apologize because 1 minute before you finish the 20 minutes, I'm going to ask you to summarize your ideas so that we can move on to the next presenter. So we're going to have virtual questions for the public, and then we're going to move on to the next session of question here with the class of 65. Dr. Perez, please, the virtual space is yours.
Olá, muito obrigado, bom dia.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First, I want to greet Minister Contel, General Salgado, and Richard. I want to say hello to all of the authorities present and the audience who is present online. And I want to congratulate the IADB for selecting this topic and for dealing with such a very important matter. For security and international defense, I'm going to divide my topic. I'm going to project my presentation with you so we can begin today.
Bom, eu espero que esteja passando tudo aí tranquilo, né?
I hope that you can see it.
Estamos vendo a tela?
Can you see the presentation? I'm sharing it. Can you see it, the presentation?
Posso conseguir? Estamos conseguindo ver a tela?
Can I continue? Can you see the presentation? Can you see my screen? Can you begin again, Dr. Perez? We're hearing you on YouTube, but not here in the room.
Bom, nós vamos seguir então essa
Okay, so then
essa agenda.
We're going to continue with this agenda. We're going to be here talking about the military applications of artificial intelligence, about the aspects of international law. Can you hear?
¿Este es Zoom o es otra plataforma? Este es Zoom. Ok.
Tá aí.
Al doctor lo escuchamos. Pero
Tô. Estou escutando normal.
Doctor, are you listening or not?
Tá ok, então, aguardo. Muito obrigado. Vou tirar a tela, então. Obrigado.
Sí,
Thank you.
no está. Aquí me aparece
Tá,
dos,
obrigado.
que es este, que no me deja estar seleccionando. Estos no funcionan. Esta es la que debe estar funcionando, pero
Let me know if we can move on to the next presenter. We apologize for these inconveniences. We're going to fix the technological issues, and let's just take advantage of the next panelist, Dr. Marcos Lopez Oneto from the University of Development of Chile and from the Center of Artificial Intelligence in Washington. And he kindly will speak to us on the armed drones and massive surveillance.
puedo pasar la pantalla ya. Extender la pantalla para que no esté saliendo. Estamos así.
No, la ponencia que voy a hacer es sobre
So the presentation that I'm going to do is about autonomous weapons and the relation between right as a mechanism for solving conflicts
Puedo reiniciar.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, good morning, buen día. Gracias por la
Good
invitación.
morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Presente a los que nos acompañan virtualmente también.
Thank you to everybody who's joining virtually as well.
La ponencia que voy a presentar se
The
denomina
presentation of today is called Autonomous Weapons, Artificial Intelligence, and Digital Dehumanization, a case of necessary connection and essential connection between artificial intelligence law and Martin's Clause.
Estamos en tránsito
We're in a transition to an era of uncertainty,
y estamos viviendo ya
and we are living now, maybe perhaps a moment, a pivotal moment of artificial intelligence, a moment where
es una metáfora poderosa
the artificial intelligence is a powerful metaphor to describe an instant where civilization is facing the point where human creation creates such a magnitude that it makes one stop oneself and look back and to wonder if knowledge has crossed the threshold.
Es el momento en que los científicos
And
como
it is the moment where scientists such as Oppenheimer to the nuclear forum are doubting because of their complete success of their technology, such a potent technology that might be let out of control. So this image sounds strongly in this area of artificial intelligence where there's a convergence of algorithms, data, and computer power, which is agitating a force which we cannot predict. The consequences we cannot predict. It's a technology that can transform the world, and it is transforming it right now, but it may also destabilize it, and it is already destabilizing it. The evolution of human and machine, it's not just a future hypothesis, it is a process that is redefining the borders between biological, technology, and cultural. the technology is not isolated, it is integrating and it is expanding together with other scientific fields, generating a co-evolution process between humans and technology. The scientists and philosophers have started theorizing that artificial intelligence acts like an accelerator of the human evolution in the same way that language evolves. And in this framework, the sciences of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and neurosciences are coming together with artificial intelligence and giving birth to systems that can reprogram live matter, also the human body, and modify cognition. The boundary between organisms and artifact is becoming blurry. The algorithms are learning from the body, and the bodies are starting to integrate and becoming hybrid with the algorithms. This convergence has not only technical implications, but ontological and ethical implications. What does it mean to be a human when intelligence and creativity can be shared or increased by a machine? And in the same way, the cultural and social sciences, the gender idea, transhumanism, are reflecting on how these transformations are reconfiguring the identities, roles, and notions. The artificial intelligence, and it's important to have this present in mind, it's not just altering biology, but it is also redefining culture, work, desire, perception. We are on the brink of an ontological change because it changes our conception of perception of beauty. We are in the brink of a new evolutional phase where the human being is not just the only being that acts, and also the convergence with other sciences. It is a revolutionary point. There's also risks that could irreversibly affect the history of humanity. So I'm going back to the beginning. Are we living our Oppenheimer moment with artificial intelligence, this instant where the human creation is a mirror, but it is also a threat to progress? Or are we in transit we're in transit to that Oppenheimer moment, where there's this border where the intelligence that has been created defies the creator? And if this transit is ongoing, if we have already activated this sequence, is there still the possibility of stopping the process, of containing what we have liberated, of imposing limits to an intelligence that is learning faster than than us in ethical and moral values? When the first nuclear rehearsal occurred and Oppenheimer saw that there was a point of no return, we need to learn to live with the fire that we have already lit up. What are the empirical data that allow us to move forward to an Oppenheimer moment? As you know, the history of humanity, the observable universe, has millions of years, and just now, this recent technological change in which that artificial intelligence is a part of starts in 1950. And in just 70 years, this machine, which is, this is not an innovation, but it is a million times more potent. So therefore, if we project the development of humanity and we think strategically 50 or 100 years later, the hypothesis that the AI, together with other technologies, such as biotechnology, nanotechnology, they're going to produce a change in the human beings that is extremely plausible.
Y la ciencia ficción
And science fiction
es la ciencia del presente.
is almost like science of the present. The first ethical questions of the topic were provided by Isaac Asimov with the famous laws of robotic in the year 40 of the last century, when he was saying that the main pillar of the robotic laws, which we can understand it as laws of artificial intelligence, because they are cited as instruments in the European law. So Asimov was saying that the first law is that the artificial intelligence cannot get to a point where the human being loses control over it, or that this harms the human beings. And so as things are going now, we have three types of artificial intelligence. Weak intelligence, which is now the current state of artificial intelligence. The general artificial intelligence, which is when the systems can have interdependence, they have common sense, and they have the capability of it. With conservatives, in the year 2100, humanity may be getting to general artificial intelligence, because for now, once we get to the general artificial intelligence, the leap to super artificial intelligence, this means when the machine awakens, when the machine says, I am, when we get to that point, the topic is critical. What is the current impact of artificial intelligence, which is right now in a weak phase? Algorithmic discrimination, surveillance and loss of privacy, lack of transparency, manipulation and autonomy, work displacement, and this dissemination of dispersion of responsibility. It is affecting the right to physical and psychic integrity, freedom of thought and expression, equality. Also, the property rights, privacy and protection of personal data, personal autonomy, and free development of personality, which is present in European law, information and explainability, and repairing and effective responsibility. And the neuronal and, well, this effective responsibility, then one of the main meetings to regulate the artificial intelligence occurred in 2017 in the Asilomar Principles. Here it was crystallized. This was an initiative, a technological initiative that is occurring in the technological world. People like Martin Chris these were the people who started, and they warned about the dangers of artificial intelligence. And they did the main catalog of ethical principles that should guide the governance of artificial intelligence. These are 23. I'm not going to mention them, but what's most important, basically, they're inspired because that they should be, the artificial intelligence should be focused on doing good. It's basically what their focus is. And Asilomar, so far, they have edited more than 300 guidelines and catalogs. I recommend to visit the observatory of the OECD because there we have the catalog, all of the catalogs, the guidelines that are established in the world. And then from there, it is very important, the ethical recommendation of UNESCO on artificial intelligence, also the principles of OECD, and also the companies nowadays, the technological companies, they're doing their own catalogs of ethical principles of governance, and Amazon, I think, doesn't have it. And then we get to a point of synthesis of this all, which these are the ontological pillars, and one can deduce and infer from these all of the norms in a matter of, as for the artificial intelligence. So then there's these are autonomy, justice, explicability, beneficence, non-maleficence, and these are principles that are shared with artificial intelligence. The principle of explicability, we have these from Professor Floridi, which is an eminence in this topic. I'm going to explain just some because I don't want to go over time. So the principle of autonomy basically looks for the fact that human being cannot create systems that have a level of autonomy that can cause moral damage. So they have a responsibility on what the artificial intelligence systems do. The systems should be explicable. They can be traced. They should be traced. So we have to know how it gets to a certain result. And practically, this is impossible today. That's why there's a field of explicability of artificial intelligence. So these are artificial intelligence systems that can explain how artificial intelligence are getting to their conclusions or results. This synthesis, ontological synthesis of the principle, is also the European Union experts are also dealing with this. And they are using these with other terms in the framework of European law. But basically, we get to this only law that exists, which is the law of artificial intelligence of the European Union, and it establishes a regulation based on risk. It establishes artificial intelligence systems that are, it says which ones are unacceptable. This cannot circulate through the European Union. For example, these are systems that may cause damage to vulnerable age groups, such as kids, older people, sick people. And also there's systems of high risk, systems that are focused on education and jobs. Those systems may definitely circulate, but they have to comply with a certain amount of requirements. So since the system is designed up to its release, they have to comply with this. And also there's systems with limited risk. These are systems that don't need to go through this process of requirements from the European Union. But however, they have requirements for transparency and then minimum risk systems. So the question is, what happens with artificial intelligence in the digital environment? Is it regulated? Obviously not, because this is a topic that nowadays doesn't have a solution at a global level. So this is the framework where we have to analyze the systems, the autonomous weapon systems of artificial intelligence, and this is in a field where there's no regulation. What are the systems of autonomous weapons? These are systems that can select objectives and they can attack objectives. and with or without human control. So they are self-governed. They can be lethal or non-lethal. They can be of massive destruction or of limited destruction. And all of the defense departments are talking about this topic and regulating on this topic. And so thank you to the United States. They have started talking about this topic. And of course, you must know the directive that establishes the sort of a framework for autonomous weapons. It establishes the levels of autonomy. There's a semi-autonomous weapons. This is activated by an operator. The operator establishes the target. The weapon starts working. Then there's the one that is supervised by a human being. It gives the possibility that once the target is selected, they can intervene, and also the autonomous ones, they can attack without intervention. There's other two categories. Oof. And when there's a general artificial intelligence, these systems will be able to exist. These are systems activated by other artificial intelligences. They won't require human activation. They can be activated by other artificial intelligences and systems that can be self-activated also, which it means that they can be self-activated. And the blockchain technology is definitely going to occupy a very important role there. So what is being said with regards to autonomous weapons in universities, in the forums, first is that it generates a digital dehumanization, because if we are numbers and we can be discriminated through an artificial intelligence system, and can you imagine that the level of discrimination when this can produce the death of a person? The loss of control, human control, the algorithm partiality, the lack of judgment and comprehension, lack of responsibility, and the reduction of the war threshold also. If in the future in the medium or long term, there's a battlefield where the presence of robotic systems is ever more bigger, maybe the public opinion will be accepting this factor of war. This is also a very complex topic. Since there are no regulations on autonomous weapons, thank you, you have 2 more minutes. So what can these states do? How can they respond to these challenges that autonomous weapons provide in a context where there's public specific regulation? So then there's two sides, the artificial intelligence law. There's also, which basically is a law that is being built based on human rights, and its objective is to drive development of artificial intelligence with an objective of sustainability of humanity. And the Martens Clause, which you have studied maybe more than once, is a clause that has been incorporated to humanitarian international law, which says that if there's no specific regulation, then the states have to use humanitarian law. And the Martens Clause has been incorporated in international treaties, in a convention on biological weapons, on gases of conventional weapons, of anti-personnel mines. So it is present in many international instruments that regulate the use of weapons. If you can give a conclusion, because we will have more time in the question and answer section. Yes, thank you. So concluding, since there's an absence of regulation, which is the current state on this topic, the states can be guided by the the artificial intelligence law and the Martin's Clause. And Martin's Clause is based on the principles of humanity, which say that we have to use that which causes the less damage as possible. If I am a designer of an autonomous weapon, I have to take into account the humanity principles in the design of the system, thereby programming so that these principles can be integrated. That's the idea. And then the artificial intelligence law is similar. During the whole cycle of life, it has to be subjected to the norms of artificial intelligence, which guide these systems. Thank you very much, Doctor. We are sorry because we have a limit of time. But and the answer and sections questions, but we have to go to break, a 5-minute break, in order to fix the agenda. So in 5 minutes, we will be back.
Prueba de sonido, ¿me escuchan?
Buenos días, damas y caballeros. Se les invita amablemente a ocupar sus lugares ya que en breve
Now we're
continuaremos.
inviting you to please take your seats and we shall continue with our
Prueba de sonido, ¿me
conference.
escuchan? 1, 2, 3, prueba de sonido, ¿me escuchan? Prueba de sonido.
United States, can you hear me?
1, 2, 3, prueba de sonido.
1, 2, 3.
¿Me escuchan? Hablen. Prueba de sonido, ¿me escucha? Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. Prueba de sonido. Haciendo una prueba de sonido.
We're making a sound test right now. A sound test.
¿Te gusta? Puede hablar con el. ¿Te gusta? Puede hablar con el exponente. Que él hable.
Can you please speak to the speaker? Ask the speaker to use a microphone, please, to say some words.
Dos, tres. Probando audio. 1, 2, 3.
Alô, 1, 2,
Testing.
3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2,
Testing. Testing.
El palestrante.
Peruano. Alexandre falou aí?
Isso, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
They're making a sound test right now.
Tá tudo bem? Conseguem me ouvir?
Dupliquemos? Dupliquemos?
Sim, doutor Alexandre, escuta.
Consegue? Eu estou ouvindo bem. Vocês conseguem me ouvir?
Auditorio. La música, ¿quién lo puso?
Bom dia a todos. Pedimos que ocupem seus lugares para que a gente possa reiniciar.
Ya que está sendo.
Já estamos felizes e conseguimos.
Good morning, everybody. We're asking you to please continue with the seminar.
¿Lograron confirmar el audio?
We're still making tests.
Se agradece a la clase 65 por su puesto para dar inicio al siguiente
We
panel.
are going to start with the next panel.
Tomen asientos, por favor.
Please take your seats.
Muy buenos días a todos. En 30 segundos continuaremos la
Good morning,
transmisión.
everybody. We shall continue our transmission in 30 seconds, so please help us and taking your seats.
Bien, señores, vamos a aprovechar el tiempo.
So we should
Y
take
creo que
advantage of
tenemos una buena
time, and I
transición de
think
la
we have a good
primera
transition
ponencia con la
from the
segunda,
first
porque el doctor Pérez
presentation
de la
with the second,
Escuela
because
Nacional
Dr.
de Justicia
Pedersen,
Militar de
National
Brasil va
Military
a hablar
Justice School of
sobre
Brazil, is going to
el tema
talk
de
about
las inteligencia artificial y armas autónomas también y desde el punto de
artificial
quién es el
intelligence,
responsable.
and from the
Entonces, para
point
no
of view of who
quitarle
is
más tiempo
responsible.
al
In
doctor
order not to
Pérez, el
take any
espacio
more
es todo
time
suyo.
from Dr. Pedersen, this is
Disculpen
your
por los
space, and
problemas
excuse us because of
tecnológicos
the
y
technological
técnicos, pero aquí
and
lo
technical
tenemos en
issues that we
pantalla
had, that we have
frente
him
con
on our screen. Please go
Muito
ahead.
obrigado mais uma vez.
Well, thank you very
Gostaria de saudar,
much.
então, novamente todas as autoridades que já foram nominadas, aos
Is
membros dessa
once
seleta
again,
mesa e à audiência em geral. Vamos, então, tentar aqui
and thank you for the
dividir
audience.
a tela com vocês, para que a gente possa prosseguir na nossa
So
apresentação.
we'll
Bom,
see
nós estaremos
the
falando, então,
screen
sobre
so that we can all follow
responsabilidade
the
pelo uso
presentation. We shall
da
be talking
inteligência
about
artificial. E a
the
fundamentação teórica dessa
artificial
manifestação está
intelligence
exatamente nos
and
relatórios do grupo de especialistas
the
governamentais da
reports
ONU
of
para esse
the
tipo de assunto,
group,
bem como algumas
these
resoluções
types
da
of,
Assembleia Geral e o entendimento do Comitê Internacional da Cruz Vermelha, que foi editado
I'm
agora
sorry, I'm
nesse
here
mês
very
de
cut,
outubro. Então, temos aqui
is,
algumas novidades. Vamos tentar seguir esse
I don't
sumário
know
para
if
ser
we have
apresentado.
any
Falarei
issue. We're going
rapidamente
to
sobre a aplicação
try
militar da inteligência
to,
artificial,
with regards to the
os
summary,
aspectos do direito internacional dos conflitos
initial
armados e terceiro, algumas
considerations
considerações
and military
finais.
application.
Sem maiores delongas,
So we should be starting
o
now.
apresentador anterior, ele facilitou o meu
The
caminho, né? Então
presenter
vamos aproveitar
facilitated
porque ele já falou.
the road, so
Basicamente, a inteligência artificial, a base teórica,
the initial
considera
text, the
uma frequência
theoretical
que
base to
consegue
be
pensar
considered.
humanamente, agir humanamente,
One can
pensar
think once
racionalmente ou agir
again
racionalmente.
o-
Mas, na verdade, o que importa no
on how
direito são
to
algumas
open
peculiaridades específicas da inteligência artificial, principalmente para o uso da inteligência artificial nos conflitos armados. E quais são essas questões? Primeiro, a questão da
which is very
automação,
successful.
a questão da imprevisibilidade e a questão do controle da pesquisa e do desenvolvimento.
There is a control,
Esses três aspectos são preocupação para exatamente os
and
órgãos que
this is
tentam
a
construir uma
concern,
convenção internacional para regular o uso militar da inteligência
and to
artificial.
regulate
Em relação
the
à
military
pesquisa e
use of
produção
this with
e
regards
desenvolvimento,
to
a principal questão que vai
the
afetar
production,
principalmente o
and the main
entendimento do Comitê
issue
Internacional da Cruz Vermelha é a
of the
opacidade
International Committee.
pela qual são
This is the final
fazer uso dos
issues, which
algoritmos
is
de
to
IA
conclude.
que serão utilizados em armas autônomas. A opacidade é uma questão estratégica e
And so,
mais à frente eu vou mostrar como a opacidade vai influenciar
so
na questão da regulação.
the-
Mas antes eu preciso falar do
with
viés.
the
O viés
algorithm
é o
errors,
último, é uma das
systematic
grandes
errors and
preocupações
relativities in
do
the
uso da
system,
IA nos conflitos armados. O viés diz respeito exatamente
is he immediately
erros
is
sistemáticos que podem
speaking
acontecer, né?
systematically
Algumas respostas
prejudice, or
podem
the
ser
systems
dadas
or
pelo sistema
algorithms of the
que não
IA
estão em
continue
consonância
to
com
taking
aquilo que é
part
esperado.
of
E isso em
the
decorrência do
process,
comportamento
making
discriminatório que
decisions
podem
in
ser
environment.
colocados em três fases da utilização desse sistema. Na verdade, na fase da modelagem
In
do
the use
processamento, nós podemos ter
of
vieses. Na
different
fase do
tools
treinamento, nós podemos ter
and
vieses
the
com dados
processing
encruzados. E na fase
and
do uso
training,
também e da utilização,
which
nós podemos
occurs as
ver
a result of
utilização
one of the
com
given
vieses que podem vir então a
in
causar
the
problemas para o direito
trendy
internacional humanitário.
entrance.
A
The
inteligência
military
artificial nas
applications
atividades
of
militares, ela tem uma
artificial
gama muito grande
intelligence,
de aplicação. Eu coloco alguns exemplos na tela, só excetuando a
as
questão do
some
enxame de drones.
examples,
Os demais exemplos são aplicações que são praticamente liberadas pelo direito
some
internacional, porque não envolvem risco aos seres humanos, não envolvem risco
which
público.
involves risks
Vamos ver
in
se esse
the
pequeno
human
filme de
being and
3 minutos
also
vai
the
rodar, para
public.
que a gente possa falar um pouco da inteligência artificial.
Maybe this video, a 3-minute video, is going to help, and I can put it on. Let me start the video.
Não rodou, vamos seguir adiante então. Esse vídeo que eu coloquei é exatamente da ONG Stopping Killing Robots, que é uma ONG que está tentando então fazer com que
So
a
this
regulação da
is
inteligência artificial para o uso militar seja
for
feita
the
de uma
use
forma
of military
coerente,
use
consistente e responsável. Mas, na verdade,
existing.
as armas
In
autônomas,
reality,
como já foi mostrado pelo
the
meu
autonomous
antecessor, são
weapons
exatamente
are
dispositivos que podem, então,
are
atacar com
but
mais
that are
alvos sem a
selected
intervenção
these
humana.
arms the
E a
weapon
questão da
system that are
intervenção humana
selected attack
ela é
or
bem apresentada
are
no relatório
greater.
do Comitê Internacional da Cruz Vermelha e diz exatamente que a não intervenção humana
And so
aquela questão que após a ativação inicial, o ser humano, a
the
aplicação da
human
força é
being, the
acionada em
application of the
resposta
forces
sem que o ser
is
humano possa
what a human
intervir,
being can do.
teoricamente.
You can intervene
E dentro do
theoretically.
contexto do uso militar da
Within the
inteligência artificial,
context of
nós
military
precisamos
use of
apresentar aqui essa questão
artificial
das
intelligence,
três vertentes.
we need to
O homem
present
dentro do looping,
the
o homem
issue,
em cima do
the
looping e o homem
man
fora do looping.
within the
E o
oh,
que é o
the loop
looping? O looping é
and at the
exatamente
top
aquilo que nos
and out of the
interessa para a
loop.
atividade
What
militar.
is
O
loop is
looping é o
precisely that what
looping
is
da
interesting
decisão,
for military activity.
é a
It is a
questão de
decision
como os militares
and
resolvem os
the
seus problemas
order.
militares.
How the
Observa,
military
orienta,
preserve their
decide e age.
military
Quando o
issues, they
ser humano não
observe,
está
orient,
dentro do
decide,
looping de
and act.
ação de uma
When the
inteligência
human being
artificial,
is not
ela
within
vai
the action
praticamente, o sistema de armas vai
looping
fazer
of
todas
artificial
essas fases do
intelligence,
processo de
it will
forma
do all those
autônoma.
phases
É
of the process in
exatamente
an
isso que se
autonomous
traz
manner.
preocupação.
And this
Eu
is
coloco aqui na tela
exactly
alguns
what
exemplos
brings
de
the serious
armamentos que já,
concerns.
já
I
utilizam,
bring some
né, a inteligência
examples
artificial
of
autônoma
weapons
e
that
já estão
are already
praticamente
using
sendo certificados pelos
autonomous
seus países.
artificial
Mas
intelligence
não
and they are already being
apresentam
certified
o
in their
problema da
countries, but
forma
they
que ele pode
do
ser
not
apresentado.
present the problem
E eu
in the
coloco
way
aqui o
that it can be
paradoxo do
presented.
emprego
And I
dos sistemas
place
autônomos em
here the
combate. Isso é uma
paradox
coisa que
of
foi construída
the
pela
use or the
pela minha
employment
pesquisa.
of those technologies.
Hoje, a sociedade
I
internacional,
did it, I
principalmente os
built it.
Estados que
So now
pretendem utilizar
international society,
armas
particularly the states that want
autônomas
to
em
use
conflitos armados, eles
autonomous
se deparam
weapons
com esse
in armed
paradoxo, com esse
conflicts,
conflito. Eles
they
precisam fazer
have
um
this
armamento que
conflict.
consiga
They
vencer
need to
o ciclo da
bring a
decisão
weapon
de forma
that
rápida e
is
mais rápida do que do
intense,
inimigo.
is
Ao mesmo
rapid
tempo,
in
esse
the
sistema
cycle,
de
and
armas ele
is
precisa ter
faster than the enemy. And that
previsibilidade
armed or
e
weapon
a sua
system needs
resposta
to
precisa
have
ser previsível
it
para
needs
que
to
ele
be
possa ser
previsible.
certificado
It
por
needs
esses
to
estados.
have
E a
response, a
análise jurídica vai
trustworthy
praticamente ser
response. This is
baseada
why it has been decided in
no tipo de
legal
tarefa que a
analysis
arma
will be the
vai
based on the
receber
type
para
of
cumprir,
task
né? E
that
dentro
the weapon is
dessa
going to
questão,
receive
o
to
grau
comply.
de controle
Within that
humano que
issue,
essa
the
arma vai ter
degree of human
e o
control that this
controle
weapon will
humano
have.
sempre
And the
é um
human
aspecto
control, ladies
principal
and gentlemen, is a
que
main aspect
interfere na aderência ao
that
direito internacional
intervenes and adherence to
o Comitê
international
Internacional da Cruz Vermelha
humanitarian law.
acredita e só
Red
aceita
Cross believes
regulamentação
and
de armas
accepts
sobre as quais você
the
tenha o
regulations
completo
of
controle
weapons
da
that the
decisão.
human being,
Ele
where the
possa
human being can have
exatamente
complete control.
utilizar o seu julgamento
The person
para
can
essas fases.
use your
Trazendo
judgment in all
segurança
of the
no
phases
campo de
from the moment
combate.
of production up until its
E isso,
use in
então,
the
vai fazer
combat
com que o
field.
sistema
And
autônomo
this
ele
will
possa ser
be where
supervisionado
the autonomous
para que não
system
cometa erros e
can should be
principalmente contra
monitored for it
os
not
direitos
to
humanos.
commit
Um
errors and
aspecto
errors
simples
against
para os
human rights.
problemas
And in this
para o
sense,
uso da
there are
inteligência
three
artificial nos
problems for
conflitos
the
armados.
use of
E quais são
artificial
esses problemas?
intelligence in armed
Primeiro, as
conflicts.
questões
And
éticas
which
que
are
foram
all those
muito bem
problems?
abordadas pelo
First of
professor,
all, ethical issues,
e segundo, as questões
which
de
my
aderência
predecessor
aos
spoke about so
princípios
well.
do
And the second
direito
is the
internacional
adherence
humanitário.
to the
E
principles of
terceiro, a
international
questão da
humanitarian
certificação
law.
e
And third,
controle.
the
Em
issue of
relação à questão
certification
ética,
and
o grande
control.
ponto
With
é
regards to
aquele
ethical
que já foi
issues,
apresentado.
the big
Como
point
colocar
there,
um
which was already
sistema de
presented,
armas
is how to
algoritmo
place a
alguma
weapon
coisa é
systems
feito para
an
controlar uma
algorithm,
máquina de
something that is
destruição
made to
para
control
decidir sobre
a
a vida e a
destruction
morte de um
machine to
ser humano.
decide over
Que
the
todas
life
as
and death of a
jurisdições
human being. We shall
nacionais do planeta
remember that all of the national
para
executions
julgar
of the planet have
crimes,
their processes
questões
to judge
jurídicas
crimes,
a
legal
pena
issues,
ao
and
que
to
possa
give
cometer
a
um crime.
sentence to a citizen
Os conflitos
that
armados
could
esse poder
have
para
committed a
falar.
crime. So how are we going to make this power for a machine? Another problem, the machine does not have a legal personality. Of any way, this autonomous system of in the legal or justice system will respond to any international jurisdiction. So this concerns the Red Cross is a part of the distinction. How are we going to have the security that an autonomous system used in combat will be able to distinguish between a civilian that did not participate in the activities and a combatant, or how the system will be able to differentiate from a combatant that is outside of the combat that uses these weapons. This, of course, is a concern for humanitarian law, how this autonomous systems of weapons will be able to understand what is the level and what is the degree of power of combat that it needs to place on the military objective to reach the desired objective. This is a very difficult issue to understand. How will it understand what is military advantage and what is exactly the power of combat necessary to reach that military advantage? And lastly, is a precaution. How will we place man to have the possibility of stopping the attack of an autonomous weapon? When we do this, we are reducing the capacity of autonomy of the weapon and response to the military problem. And lastly, the certification and control. Article 36 of the paragraph I of the additional Protocol 1, excuse me, Article 36 of Protocol 1 says that the states have the right to see if their weapons and technological means that are implemented as combat weapons have adherence to international humanitarian law. There is not one single organization that has been authorized to do this. This is there so the state can decide, and the state has to build a technological weapon or where an autonomous weapon has to have a weapon that respects the prohibitions that already exist, such as if it doesn't have the capacity to see nuclear data or biological or chemical data, if it doesn't have the capacity to see or to discriminate, many weapons are forbidden to be used in armed conflict. And along this road that we're looking for on the side of international humanitarian law and Red Cross is to place the human being as a maximum capacity to anticipate its effect. And this is an issue that is going to fall on top of the commander that will decide to activate an autonomous system, autonomous weapons system. And for this, it is necessary that the commander has complete visibility and trust that the system will be capable of doing it, to be previsible, to know exactly which is the functioning as operating issues and the outcome that comes out of the use of artificial intelligence to have the security that the system will function exactly in the way for which it had been built in order for it to function. So in this sense is where we have the meaning of human control for international humanitarian law of an autonomous weapons needs to be very significant, needs to be explained and needs to have its own judgment made by a human being. The machine cannot be capable of judging or deciding by itself. So, in this sense, as part of human control, we must have the previsibility, the trust, and the human intervention in the cycle of action of the machine, perfect knowledge and information of how this machine is going to operate and function. And the conscious consciousness that the responsibility will never fall on the machine, but will fall on the human being. The degree of control can be established in several ways. As I said, the development of tasks, the decision of the commander or the operator to activate, and the operation of the system. So along these lines, control and development, we need to keep in mind if we really decide to build and use in artificial intelligence systems, and we have to limit its use for a specific thing. We need to have the capacity to restrict its movement, time, and space, and we must allow human supervision, activation, knowledge, and understanding of the functioning of the environment must be fundamental. The consciousness of the situation of the operational environment or the weapon is going to be used to prevent any risk that could occur for civilians and civilian objects. And the control of the operation, the control must always be in the hands of man. The level of human supervision of intervention is fundamental in this sense. So the technical development and the manipulation of parameters and human supervision are extremely important in order to be able to certify the autonomous weapon system. And what concerns the International Red Cross Committee in search of that response? The UN has been studying this for some time and some decisions have been reached. The national states that are participating the run of artificial intelligence weapons have the reasons to be able to develop this, and the UN and Red Cross cannot regulate our future, the future of the armed conflict. We shall be within a tremendous gray zone because UN considers that there will be great difficulty of differentiation, the amount of data that we can place, if we can place all the combat parameters within these autonomous weapons. At this point in time of our history, without the computer, it's very big. Another thing that we say is that undiscriminated attacks and without precaution, once within the combat, and the military seek to go against the cycle and to be faster than the enemy, to defeat and go faster than the enemy, where they will place parameters to intervene in that decision without making that the weapon system loses its effectiveness and speed, operating speed. And lastly, the proportionality. So we don't know if this it generates a big concern in the International Red Cross Committee. A suggestion is to make or build an international convention to prohibit weapons that do not have adherence to these aspects, particularly the aspects of proportionality. What are the strengths for the future with regards to the autonomous weapon? Integration to the processes. These are not predictable. They do not have a purpose if they don't use a machine because they have to self-adjust themselves. At that time, the Red Cross suggests that the system of learning for machine has been prohibited in these swarms and the free autonomy that has to give for the decision of these type of weapon and expand the capacity of the more possibilities that happen. What are the challenges? Challenge one is responsibility for war crimes. How is this going to be done? We're going to talk about that later. Ethical issues that were already talked about with great property by my predecessor, the Martin's Clause, how to do or what to do until one has a convention establishing the parameters that these weapons, if exist, can obey the human criteria and dictates of publicization. And so to put mass weapons in operation, to see the different paradigms and use of force that could appear in the combat field, and how to control research and development and avoid the proliferation, this uncontrolled proliferation of that system, the use of force, how a weapon, autonomous weapon, can understand what behaviors in the application of law and order or the enforcement of law and order, the hostility behaviors is violence that could be used at the maximum level from the first contact with a lethal force, and the enforcement of law and order. And the lethal force is the last step. So in this, along this road, the responsibility will will lie in three different pillars: the state that can be made responsible for illegal issues international. The individual will be responsible before the international courts. If it's not the responsibility of the institution, they will also have the civil responsibility of all harm that could occur or damage that can occur to uh, civilians and objects. So we have the solidary responsibility, and this will be done at all levels. Never before in armed conflict a weapon had this type of responsibility. The builders of the algorithm are responsible. The technicians who are going to load the data also have a responsibility. The persons who will be training and the commanders, the field commanders, will also be responsible. So, in this sense, one sees the core issues. Is everybody okay? Everybody listening? We have to close this part so that we can leave this for questions and answers.
Ok, então.
Go
Então,
to the next
encerrando, a
presentation,
gente deixa considerações finais
and
para o debate. Muito obrigado.
we shall leave the considerations for questions and answers. So I shall stop here. Excuse me, I couldn't conclude. So I ask for excuses because of time constraints. And our second presentation talked about the strategic aspects of military decisions with regards to artificial intelligence. Or a third presentation, we shall see if the operational aspects with the digital war with Lieutenant Colonel of Peruvian Army, Mr. Colonel Diaz, Colonel Medina Diaz, please, your presentation.
Buenos días, ¿estamos en línea?
Good morning. Are we online? Thank you very much for your invitation. On behalf of the Republic of Peru, thank everybody who gives us the permission to be in these spaces. We thank from the Ministry of Defense and of the Center of International Humanitarian Law. And so my topic is short, but we shall try to resolve, but we shall ensure that it's of the authority and responsibility of that cyber operations. The digital war, what is the digital war, also known as cyber war? These are conflicts that are developed in the cyberspace, and these conflicts that are developed here have adherence on a state, two states, or adherence many states where there is not a situation that allows us to have definite, defined responsibility on the management of this large situation. Cyberspace definitely does not have an information environment that is of exclusive domain, the global domain. In the independent structure of IT systems and devices and measures. Of course, these are embedded devices designed to carry out specific functions within the coordinated devices to optimize and make a optimization of the decision. It's true that it involves internet, but in any case, it involves the devices of the systems. The cyberspace shows where it's determined by cyber operations, where military and non-military issues, the offensive, defensive, and intelligence operations within an effective applications of these types of situations. The offensive situations seem to degrade or enemy operations within the of offensive of operations of enemies or a usual operation where it has an initial nature where it has multiple devices such as the itinerant, which are computers, cameras, all of the devices that are connected virtually or wireless. This has a congruence regarding the coordination of attacks where all of the data sent or requests are fully defined and has where the system is saturated with saturation goes directly over the network servers. Definitely, there has been attacks that have occurred in different times, particularly one of the incidents was in 2016, an attack to Deviant products where definitely it incited with regards to the service and vulnerabilities that it had as regards the infrastructure that it could manage. So supposedly these are framed within different organizations and they definitely see the viability and the idea that we are how we're exposed to different attacks definitely was not like in previous year like an attack other places. Now their end purpose is to cause damage uh, that is in all fields of human attacks and all of the systems that can be generated with regards to cyber operations. We have different types of these cyber issues where it could help us in our daily work, recurring systems that can work in these defensive situations like Stuxnet or solar winds have had a recurrence to see that all of these systems require of an active participation as regards the the to do the political, economic, industry, military, and personal, even the society as regards their participation. Another of the aspects that generates a concern situation is to see that cyber operations also recur to intelligence, where intelligence and the collection of information through digital means without authorization, having this competence of what we're carrying out could be included in different networks, the capture of sensitive data. Yesterday, I can say that here in Peru, we had a recurrence as regards a situation directly over national identity documents, which recurs all of the situations as regards of the data administration. There are important aspects as regards the enforcement of these systems. One saves the different application. Basically, that there were cyber applications of national defense or war are exposed. And they're also recurring as regards knowing the information and knowledge of these information, which creates uncertainty with all of the different bodies. And another important aspect is the government part where the protection of critical issues is critical and sensitive data of state, of recurrence and adherence of all where we all belong. Of course, private or public activities do not escape this as regards uh, uh, private administration, the corporate networks and resilience. All of this has a criminal, like where organized crime looks to extort and sabotage. Different technical tools are being used with an influencing issue, as particularly as the identity where phishing enters into the emails where we do not have an apparent issue where seeing different phases or presentations that are necessary so that the people can access different usual uses of the same. That's where they're introduced. It's also recurring to see how social engineer and a series of technicals used to manipulate and uh, trick people in having information. Also, it has with the issue of day-to-day work where the information is seen from its very beginning. We see different threads as we have seen in the deployment of this, and this makes us understand how, within the operations on a day-to-day basis, are entering and seeing how cyber operations within the framework of international humanitarian law is going to introduce, which is the applicable framework with regards to this. And we keep in mind of that international humanitarian law is applied in national and international conflicts, and it has persons that are not involved. And then at in Geneva we have four conventions, and within human rights should applies in all of its magnitude and to see the conflict. And this is applied to state actions. Some rights could be limited in circumstances, particularly those that could be restricted. Definitely talk within this applicable framework. The steps that we're carrying out are still not necessary to establish regulation that allows protection as regards to aspects both in human rights and international humanitarian law, which sees an opening for the illegal issues in all of its magnitude. The principles applicable as regards the prohibitions, distinction, proportionality, precaution, responsibility, and protection always has a recurrence because they deal with what's inherent to people, what's inherent to conventionality or the functionality as regards to the development of these, as regards distinction. Definitely, if we are in war and applying IHL, we see that the answer is towards military objectives designed and defined. However, when these military objectives do not have distinction, we shall have an inherence that will harm the citizen that is outside of the operation. Is also necessary to have proportionality effect, be it the military objective and not to cause harm to civilians with regards to the anticipated issues where we see recurrence. Uh, and since we're seeing in the world occurrences within the conventions, there are gray zones, gray areas where unrestricted respect to public property and private property and to conserve the culture in the world sometimes makes us infringe on different access that occur. Some precautions in the conduction of these issues is to verify the nature and objective, and particularly to minimize the incidental damage. The collateral harm should be uh, better. We can work on that within the possibilities, also possibilities of indispensable services for survival. We see that the public services are essential and necessary so that the citizens can continue to work. The reinciting cases in conductivity are not without protection with all that viability. We have obligations with regards to human rights in cyber operations, and this allows us to see that not only the management of the networks, both military or civilian, are not exempt. We have hospitals that currently function on network. We have schools that are working through this large magnitude that is allowed by the wireless and non-wireless networks. And this is definitely backed by all of the obligation that has so much for human right and for international humanitarian law. And privacy is very important. There's a situation definitely is going to stop to belong to us if we don't enter into the possibility of being able to uh, hang on to that situation. The freedom of information and expression we always associate it, and this is an inherence of the human being. However, for cases like these situations, the restrictions that need to be implemented need to be more strict, that the states and the political commitment needs to have a necessary recurrence with the purpose that the protection is greater and that the spaces are not so indelible, that they need to be rigid, where you see an ordinance, the expression of information for the citizens and persons who are not involved in a conflict. There are situations that correspond to a due process or affect the resources within the legal standards, and these are legal issues of a response that is still being under implementation, where the legal part with an arm of is going to be working on this trend. There is obligations to carry out due diligence, extraction, and particularly the responsibility that needs to be assumed in every situation, which allows that this process is being carried out in a clear and effective way. There's practical, legal, specific problems, particularly in cyberspace zone that definitely is open for all the crime situations and has great prevalence in the situation. It's usually difficult. Let's keep in mind that the actions of these persons or groups or states that dedicate to these activities definitely do not have recurrence because the location is not referenced. The attacks can come from anywhere, and the domain allows you to move within any field of dimensions, including even with war. Regarding the opacity, these are critical infrastructures where definitely they need to be practical or private. Public and private issues are complicated. So there's an unintentional propagation where it's propagated through word to have obligations or to cause issues, and there are issues that affect harm in the future, and previsibility and proportionality, the ordinance and regulations and guidelines that are seen in future need to be isolated in the future, and the interference with humanitarian services, the practical and legal services need to create limitation with this temporary limitation translated to spaces summarized and standards that allow to go further as regards the sanctions and particularly the responsibilities that we may understand within the situation that definitely uh, enclose who are the responsible of these situations. If they violate as regarding international humanitarian law, it can be constitutional war crimes and crimes of civils against civilians. Definitely, the networks don't have a situation that we can define. Let's say collateral damages, and we have seen it in proportionality, and where the damage has been disproportionate and collateral harm are substantial. These migrations will also have substantial uh, inherence on the which on the part of the state could lead to international repairs and internal sanctions, particularly when one presents a due justification. A situation that we definitely need to keep in mind is Geneva, with really the applicable law of the jurisprudence and the legal issues, such as the inter-American law and inherent regulations on cyber operations that allow us to regulate these. There's some conclusions that I'm going to keep in mind, without forgetting to say we have the need to have awareness and particularly in the military, so where the prohibition and limitations that recurrence as regards defining responsibilities in every sense. And we have to answer the question of image and of the presentation. Who is responsible? We are all responsible. We got responsible at the political level, user level, and community level. Why do we have at the user level? because it's responsible of preparing a basic information. The networks are produced through information. This is deliberate information that we provide. This makes us vulnerable towards in different situations. Why the mass media or the journalists and the radio are responsible because they have to have this clear and true dissemination of information. The expression cannot be given openly. In our case, we see that the social networks definitely the truth or lie, and they're without truth. And so these are spaces that we have to work with the possibility of seeing these situations that give us a freedom during the day-to-day life, have their due regulations within the executive authorities and powers. It should be the ministries that are involved in communication and have a strict regulation regarding the dissemination to the media and have a situation apart from the that are subject to the situations. There's something else that's responsible, a shared responsibility, technological, and IT is a huge step of humanity. We are seeing that everything is changing, is taking us along another route, which is quantical, and is going to different processes are going to evolve fastly. However, we need to have due regulations that orient us to see the efforts both of international laws such as Budapest or the one of the Cali Manual, and different situations have a sense of the legal defined. I'm going to end up with the application, the applicability of IHL cyberspace is applied within cyber operations. It will have place within the context of an armed conflict. Let's keep in mind that the domain of war can be influential in air, land, or maritime, and the electromagnetic space and the human space includes having inherence in the management of everything. It's not there. Biological damage, the incidents that could occur with this dimension regarding the development of cyber operation includes all of the military field operations and non-military field operations. The principles, standards, and responsibilities has to be seen regarding the proportionality. If there's a military necessity that involves a restriction of a essential public service, let's keep in mind that all of the service around the world are found through the networks where programming are exactly defined. So the collapse of a city, of a state, of a country is given through one person that should even have the seen to work cyberspace within the attack definition of cyberspace. It constitutes an attack according to IHL, where it can cause damage or destruction to persons or protected assets. We have to keep in mind that to preserve and the future is the responsibility of all human beings. These deliberate attacks can also generate mass destruction, not only because it was constitution of being able to have that freedom. Not all of these cyber operations are attacks. Let's keep in mind that these attacks that can be translated are seen in the responsibility that we have, with the resources that we have regarding the peripherals, such as memories, different systems, emails, and situations, and even through the family, we could introduce or have security. There's a situation we have to see with the protection of civilians and civilian assets. Further, can you summarize in 30 seconds the last part so that we can go to the question and answer? Thank you. Time is short and the topic is broad, but as a general conclusion, I could allow that cyberspace that has a new issue to work and challenges the issues of international humanitarian law and the fundamental the principles of international community. You see the challenge to develop the legal framework to guarantee that human rights are respected for this cycle. I thank you very much, and I conclude. Thank you very much.
Los tres ponentes estén muy atentos porque tengo seis
Please
preguntas
pay
del
attention
público
because I have
virtual que
6
voy a leer
questions from the
y
public and I'm
voy a
going
dejar
to
que
read
sobrevuelen
them. I'm going to read the 6 questions. Please just address the questions that correspond to your expertise, and then I'm going to give you 5 minutes to each of you to respond to these questions. So I'm going to read the 6 questions now. The first one is, the autonomous weapons, is it possible that there's better results than the systems implemented by men? Then the second question from Mexico. Within the types of artificial intelligence, how can they affect or influence or have an impact on the systems of security and defense? From Peru, with regards to the norms of artificial intelligence, do you consider that it should be taken into account in the military area? From Ecuador, since a machine doesn't have a legal person, it's not a legal person, who would be responsible in case of crimes against humanity? What legal mechanisms allow to overpose the activity of artificial intelligence above the rights, such as intimacy? And finally, from Chile, how can the clause, the Martens Clause, can influence in public policies with regards to artificial intelligence in the area of a defense area of a country? So first, we have 18 minutes, so everybody has like 5 minutes to respond. So I'm going to provide the first spaces for Dr. Lopez. Yes. I'm going to respond to the question. And I'm going to address briefly the ones made virtually. So the first question, this is an purely ethical topic. Let's imagine that we develop a system of autonomous weapons that have the capability to throw less bullets, less collateral damage than what weapons or systems of weapons controlled by humans can produce. Let's remember that the human being it's a compassionate being. And if we were able to design a system that in a war context, open war context, could produce less pain, less collateral damage, the question would be, why not rely on 100% autonomous weapon if the human rights are going to be even more respected than if these war activities were just controlled by human beings? All of these ethical questions are very deep, because what happens is that if we get to the general artificial intelligence phase, and there's like neuro-autonomous systems, if they were able to get empirical results that were much better in terms of human methods that are controlled by humans, then the response would be, well, maybe the human being is not being a human being anymore, and it's giving everything to artificial intelligence. So I think that human beings have to be able to improve ethically and not be seduced by this true if a system can guarantee this level of reliability, then maybe it's preferable to leave it in the hands of the human beings. The ethical topic is basic. One of the topics is autonomous vehicles is also like delayed. If, for example, there's an autonomous driven car and somebody's crossing the street with two little brothers in the hand, and the autonomous car has to make the decision if they run over the kids because it's going really fast. Since we cannot answer this question yet, because human life is at stake, and human life is human life, from a kid or from an old person. So while we don't have an ethical response, a solid ethical response for the application of artificial intelligence in the civil as well as in the military fields, then it will not take place. It will not be implemented. If we arrive at a general artificial intelligence, it will have like hegemonic control over the history of humanity.
Bom, eu gostaria apenas de ressaltar
I would like to just highlight
que o direito internacional humanitário,
that
melhor,
humanitarian international law, which is known as international human rights of the armed forces, has been built to allow death, physical damage, and destruction. This paradigm, we cannot forget about it. Nuclear weapons cause death, damages, and destruction. Chemical weapons, any type of weapon that is being employed in an armed conflict causes death, damage, and destruction. So I think that's terrible. I always asked my students, I always tell them about Mayer, which is a human biologist, that human beings are biological, while
mas infelizmente é isso.
it's a species that from its arising,
Encarar isso como uma realidade.
we have to somehow face it like a reality. And this is what we're trying to do with the regulating of the autonomous weapons to avoid collateral damage for civilians and for people that are not participating in these activities, and also for civilian objects. Somebody asked if autonomous weapons improve results in armed conflicts. Without a doubt. They improve results in all aspects, in the damages that may be caused, in the troops that are being used, and if there's adherence to the principles that we have presented, then also the collateral damage issue is going to be solved. So let's remember that collateral damage is not prohibited during war. It is always related to military advantage that the troop will receive. This type of questionings, we have to always have this in mind. The speed of artificial intelligence is way faster than human reasoning. The artificial intelligence, it will be exchanging, it's basically exchanging the human reasoning by machine reasoning, and it may bring a military advantage. The machine is not going to be responsible. It's not going to be held responsible. But whoever uses the machine, then it will be subjected to humanitarian law.
Definitivamente los 6 puntos han sido
Definitely, the
guiados
6
por lo
points
que
have
dice
been
inteligencia
guided
artificial.
towards
Sin embargo,
artificial
hay
intelligence.
una
However,
pequeña
there's an
parte del
interaction
ciberespacio donde influye
in the
cada momento.
cyberspace
Esta
where
herramienta tiene una situación
this
muy
tool
sensitiva que
has an
requiere
impact
también
every time.
alocarse, sobre todo en
And
cuanto a la automatización y
as
optimización de
far as
procesos, sobre todo
optimization of
para que los
processes,
procesos definitivamente se
mostly,
evalúen
and
con
now that the
capacitación,
processes
modernización y estandarización.
are
Asimismo, hay
being
una posibilidad de
standardized, there's a
manipulación de
possibility
spam,
of
presiones de fraude en
infiltration,
tiempo
of
real,
fraud
no
in real
solamente
time,
en cuanto a acciones
not
y operaciones
just
militares.
as far
Ahí
as
tenemos
military
una posibilidad
actions, but
inmensa
also
de
there's a
control,
possibility
administración de redes, tráfico,
of
mantenimiento de
management
servidores.
of
Definitivamente,
networks,
hay
servers,
situaciones donde
definitely where
podamos
the
albergar
situations where
redundancias
we
y
could have
importancia
redundancy,
definitiva.
it would be
Así
definitely
mismo,
of
tenemos que tener
definitive
en claro también
importance,
que
and we
esta
have to have clear that
ciberseguridad y
this
la inteligencia
cybersecurity
artificial tiene
and artificial
sistemas de detección
intelligence
de
has
intrusos que hace más fácil
systems
el
for
manejo
detecting
y el movimiento
intruders,
en
which
tanto
makes
en
it more
bases de
effective
datos que tenemos una
to
capacidad directa de
detect also movement on databases. And another AI quality that it improves the predictive situations as far as analysis. A predictive analysis is more feasible. It allows to interact.
no solamente de los actos
It's
decisorios y
also
las actividades que tienen
for
la
decision
función
making,
del mando, sino que les influye.
not just for
También incluye
authorities,
una
but
particularidad en la
it
autenticidad
also has a
biométrica, la cual
particularly in
tenemos que
the
tener cuidado en
biometric
cuanto a la
capacity, and we
recurrencia
need
del
to be
manejo
careful
de
as
los
far as the
sistemas.
recurrence of
El
the
IA también crea
handling of all these
nuevamente
systems.
intrusos
And also AI can
disfrazados de
create
phishing personalizados y
intruders
personalizados.
disguised as
Definitivamente que
malware.
estamos en una
So
situación
we're
de
definitely in
emergencia
a
y
situation of
vulnerables a todas las
vulnerability
posibilidades que
to
tengan
all the
este accionario
possibilities that
maligno.
these uh,
Dentro de la información
criminal
debe
activities can
regularse la
have.
IA.
And
También, como lo ha
within the
mencionado,
actions that
tenemos
have to be
responsabilidades
regulated
dentro
within
del IA de
AI,
derechos humanos. Tenemos que ver
as far as
que los
responsibilities for
algoritmos
human
tengan
rights,
una
we have to see that the algorithms
repercusión
that have a
incisiva deben ser
repercussion
debidamente regulados. No
have to be
automáticamente,
regulated.
no en
They need
cuanto a
to have
limitaciones.
everything
Debe
as
haber una
far as
facilitación
limitations
de generar espacios de
in order to
confianza,
generate
que no haya una
spaces
libertad
of
en el uso de los
confidence, of
recursos.
trust, and there's
Esa
no like
generación de
freedom in the use of
contenidos
these
automatizados
resources.
también debe estar
This
regulado,
also generation of
porque
automated
definitivamente
contents needs to be
toda
regulated because
facilitación
definitely
no
everything is education,
debe
and
ser
education
desinformación, debe
should
ser
not be
información clara,
disinformation. It has to be
precisa
clear
y
information,
veraz. Y
precise
sobre todo
and
en las redes
truthful.
sociales, donde tenemos
And
una
social
influencia,
networks where we
pues son
have
sociales
this
que pueden amplificar
influence,
mensajes, inclusive la
it
parte
could be
política, inclusive
driving
la parte
political
comercial.
messages or
Y
commercial
definitivamente
messages,
manipular la
and
información
definitely it can
no
manipulate
es
information,
algo que
which is
complique
not
la
something
existencia de la
that
persona solo por tener derecho.
complicates
Repito, dentro de las
people
6 no han
just because it
sido
has the right to.
pero
So
sí
within the
importantes
field
porque
that I had to present, this is the importance of AI in this space and in all fields of human activity. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel. We have 5 more minutes with the virtual public. So we're going to ask here the presenters that in 60 seconds, please share a final point that you want to transmit to the public. Colonel Medina. Yes, my final conclusions are as far as the commitment that we have as a state, as far as regulating the norms, as far as the cyberspace, spaces that allow to have a trust in development of conserving the humanity in a human rights situation, and the implications that we have in generating a state of the law, rule of law, through any technological advancement. Thank you, Colonel Medina. Now, Dr. Perez.
Bom, a minha consideração final é que
Oh, well, my final consideration is that I bring to you this perplexity, the development of the AI for weapon systems cannot be biased by international politics. There needs to be respect to the organs that control precisely for the Red Cross Committee. Otherwise, war in the future could be the last war of humanity. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Lopez. Because of the lack of international treaties and legal norms that deal with the use of artificial intelligence in the military environment, the only tools that humanity has in order to regulate this topic are what we have defined as the law on artificial intelligence, and on the other side, the Martens Clause, which is an international humanitarian law, basically. And therefore, the systems of both autonomous weapons that need to be designed in order to comply with these components. So their whole life cycle need to be adhering to the norms of international humanitarian law, especially with Martens Clause. And the creators need to see how they can program these systems in accordance with these requirements. Okay, thank you for staying within the time frame. Now we're going to thank our virtual attendees, and now we're going to open up the physical space for the participants of class 65 and the rest of the public that is present, so that they can ask their questions for Dr. Perez, Colonel Lopez, and Colonel Medina. Sorry for the inconveniences. Next, we want to invite the moderator, Brigadier General retired Juan Carlos Gomez Ramirez, who is an expert in security, defense, and humanitarian affairs. He's a serious professional with more than 40 years in security, defense, and the responsible use of the force with a basis in human rights and humanitarian international law. He has been personnel for the Red Cross in Gaza from October to November of 2024, and currently he is a teacher in the IADC in Washington, and he is committed with ethical leadership and the strategic vision for the Americas. In this panel, he is joined by Colonel Eduardo Villancur Cavalcanti, a specialist in humanitarian law, military law, and public administration law. He is a lawyer in the University of Brazil. He's specialized in humanitarian law, international humanitarian law, and human rights, military rights, and public administration rights. He is also an associated teacher for the courses of Portuguese in Sanremo, Italy, where he was designated by the commander of the army for 2019-2020 to establish a cooperation in person between the Brazilian army for the upper education as far as armed conflict rights. Also, Dr. Ana Lucia Cinta Narvaez is joining them. She is an advisor of the Armed Forces and Security, and also for the regional delegation for Mexico and Central America. She has a master's in human rights in the European University Center. And also she worked in Mexico in the Supreme Court of Justice, in the Congress of La Unión, and then also after 3 years of military work, volunteer work in the ex-Republic of Yugoslavia. She has also done specialized studies by the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights in San Jose, Costa Rica, and the International Institute of Humanitarian Rights in San Remo, Italy. Also operational rights and humanitarian international law by the same institute, and on the International Committee of the Red Cross on the workshop for superior officers. And she entered the Committee of the Red Cross in 2017 as a program officer to the Armed Forces and Security Forces. Also, we have Colonel Luis Alfonso Novoa Diaz, who is a commissioner of human rights for the National Police of Colombia. He's an alternate representative for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in defense of the Colombian state to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. He also was a consultant for the International Transitional Justice Center in the case of the clarification of the Holocaust of the Palace of Justice. Also, he's a consultant in security and justice from the Department of the United States in the Embassy of Guatemala. He also was an advisor in the peace process among FARC and the government, and also coordinator of the team of defenders of human rights between 2011 and 2021, and in the Office of High Commission of the United Nations for Human Rights in Colombia, and has a master in international penal law and defense and hemisphere security. I invite General Juan Carlos Gomez and all of the two presenters who are joining him. Before we start with the second panel, dear audience, we inform you that these opinions that are issued today and expressed by all the presenters represent their opinions, and they don't necessarily express the opinion of the IADB. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is really an honor and a privilege to have the possibility of moderating this panel. I appreciate those who are joining us virtually. So there's more than 20,000 people connected through YouTube, and somehow this explains, but doesn't justify, but it explains the difficulties that we've had from the technical point of view. So for this second panel, we're going to talk about protection of civil population in context of security and in the context of defense. For me, it is a true honor and a privilege to begin this panel, which addresses one of the more complex dilemmas and urgent of our time, which is the protection of the civil population. And this is done in scenarios where public security and national defense are intertwined, and often in a very diffuse and defying manner. Today, we are going to have a serious conversation, a critical and very necessary one, because when urban violence gets intensified, when hybrid conflicts are diffusing the borders between war and public order, when the most vulnerable women, kids, entire communities are trapped in the middle of these dynamics, the legal framework that should be protecting them is put to the test. I want to set some examples of situations that have happened recently without judging, but just to mention them as an opening for our panelists and for you as participants of this event. So Sudan, 460 people died in a hospital. Rio de Janeiro, 132 deaths. Gaza, they're in the process of peace. Between 100 and 110 people died between the war of Russia and Ukraine. Between 500 and 1,000 people died yesterday in the Caribbean and in the Pacific in military operations in the last days. 62 people have died. This, without judging, it's just to highlight the importance of a topic like this today. This panel is not just an academic presentation. It is an invitation to think with rigor, to listen openly, and to debate with responsibility. We have 3 experts, international experts with operational, judicial, and humanitarian experience that without a doubt will help us explore the key questions that arise. Like, for example, when does the humanitarian international law apply in a context? How are human rights integrated into the military and police doctrine? What do we do in the gray areas, hybrid wars, and the use of force in social protests? There's no easy answers, but there is an obligation, an ethical and professional one, a legal responsibility to look for clarity, to look for coherence, to look for efficacy in the protection of civilians. That's the task that is gathering us here today. I invite you to listen with attention, to question openly and respectfully, because this debate is not just technical, it is deeply humane. And to enrich these reflections, we have three panelists that are very high level. Colonel Eduardo Betancourt from the Institute of Humanitarian International Law of San Remo, who is the academic soul that is more prestigious in humanitarian international law, and the colonel is a professor of this organization. We have Ana Luisa, who comes representing the International Committee of the Red Cross, and it is the international organization that has in humanitarian international law, is in charge of that, and it has as a responsibility its application. And also we have from Colombia, the Colonel Novoa, who is a person who I've had the fortune and the opportunity to get to know him in my work life in Colombia, and I know that his work in the topic of human rights and protection. So we have a panel which is very important, and it's going to illuminate us on the topics that we have stated. So, Colonel Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to also compliment, I'm going to say hello to everybody who's joining us today. It is a very complex issue. It is difficult, and the idea is to build a participation from everyone, a reflection that is useful for applying it in our countries and universally. I'm going to share a presentation so that we can take advantage of the time, make good use of time. So this is the response to the challenges that are presented in our seminars. This is a question that I'm bringing to the table. How can the protection of the civil population happen in the context of public security and defense of human rights and humanitarian international law? What norm is applicable? General said that this was a very complex and difficult topic. So I'm going to share this difficulty with you so that you can have a response. And the class of 65 will provide conclusions. So I'm putting this topic, this complication, because this is a new study of conflicts and shapes and that the UN has for this scenario, the current scenario, and I'm sharing this with you. So what is the best protection that we can give? We have to know what we are facing. We have to get to know what we're facing in order to provide a response. These are some pictures so that you can see the difficulties. Then you can see if the civilians are in a context of violence, if there's a conflict in the population. You can see there that they are civilians, they are not wearing uniforms. It is a participation that is not direct, but it contributes to the effort, or maybe they're victims of a situation of conflict and they need to be protected. This picture means that there's several parts of our country, the Middle East, and even my country. Certainly, there's no exclusivity. It happens in my country. There's similar situations happening also in other parts of the world. This picture shows this case of where public forces are acting in a scenario of violence to restore the order. to bring tranquility, to calm down the civil population that live in this area, but the presence of the public forces cause this uncomfortable and inconvenient for some civilians. So the question is, who is that civilian? Who are we facing in this place? Are they criminals, isolated criminals? Are they criminal organizations? Or I don't know if there's a more complex configuration, like a criminal group, armed group. So we're getting to a level of organization like a criminal organized group, because I put all these options because it is difficult to identify these people. So then based on when we know these people, we know what norm to apply. This norm can be used to protect. It has to be applied in an adequate scenario. I heard the presenters, and maybe we need a new paradigm that needs to be developed and needs to be presented. Also the laws need to be updated to what's happening. I brought here a list of what we need to observe in this list of for classifying. In that scenario of violence, we have a technology that I'm sharing with you, which is, for example, we have a criminal. This is the highest level of criminality in suffrage, which is insurgency, which so that we can guarantee that the criminal conduct will be pursued. So whoever interprets the criminals, they're going to deliver the product of the criminals without the participation of the state. This can happen in many different ways. Sometimes the authorities, they have the power. The government is not the state here in these areas. So in these areas, who commands the life of people there? Is there like an orientation that needs to be followed? Or do they need to go far to buy water, for example? These are the essentials that we need to use every day: internet, television. Maybe that parallel power could be there, determining that this is like a parallel power. It is an offense to sovereignty. It would be a configuration of a territory that doesn't have a link to the government. So then this offense to sovereignty, we have an idea that it is necessary to have a defense action in that context, which is particular to the military forces. So to go beyond the police capacity and this is where it is important to have the military forces for combat. Also the organization and intensity of the violence. We need to have the perpetrators. There needs to be a certain amount of intensity of the violence, and then also the legal consequences need to be as intense. And so then here we don't know if it's an organized criminal group. This organization goes from one and it goes to the other. So then what is the intensity? Based on what parameters can this violence is violence that is typical to an armed conflict, the number of people, number of deaths, number of weapons that the organization has. It depends on the weapons that they are using. Are these weapons that can be make a helicopter come down? So we have to see the type of weapons. Do they have the necessary ammunition, the degree of violence that we're dealing with? And then we have the paradoxes, operational paradoxes of public forces. This is a matter of that the police forces need to be attributed with a specific activity that is military, that is strictly military. So the police with the military forces and the armed forces, they need to act within the same threshold or limit that the police are working on. So in my country, in Rio de Janeiro, they do a police operations with more than 130 people have died. It doesn't matter if they are police or civilians, they're just people. Can we configure this and classify it as a police operation so that it has like a configuration of armed conflict? Or maybe it's the transition from one to the other. So the difficulty to overcome this transition and to have security in that transition, who is responsible to say that we are in a transition from one scenario to the other? Is it the police or is it an armed conflict? We need to manage the activities. So the public forces have the legitimacy to approve this as the public opinion, as an ethical consideration. So to have this acceptance within the legal parameters, but also take into account the public opinion who is going to approve this intervention from the state. And on the contrary, the opponent is going to try to promote the strengthening of their criminal activities. So it is a challenge that we have in the current scenario. It may be that this is configuring a new classification, a new paradigm. Because I'm gonna put it here graphically so you can understand. We have the humanitarian international law, and it is complemented by human rights. And we have this intersection lines, which is the hard nucleus of the human rights. So what is this? We have the scenario of armed conflicts. Then this paradigm of application of law, in that case, specifically the human right norms, there are some characteristics that are important and necessary for legal security. I place here, I highlighted the rules. The rules are different in a conflict, in an armed conflict. If we have public security, it will. How do we do this? How does this transition happen? The proportion that we were talking about. The proportion would be the offense through moderate means or the same offense. We're talking about proportion of the armed forces.
O que vai acontecer no terreno para o operador é que ele vai estar atuando para dar uma solução estatal a problema de violência, onde ele não pode ser, na verdade, o problema para o Estado.
It could become a problem to the state. It has to operate within the limits. When we're talking about human rights, about a lethal force. Normally, in defense, we use the lethal force. In the armed conflicts, we're going to attack the objective. So we need to know in each scenario, we need to know which scenario is not applicable. We need to know if the state response is according to the dimension of the problem. So to attack a very serious problem with a not so robust answer can just make the problem even more serious. For example, here there's a comparison of this principle of proportion for the armed forces and public security. This is a subject for debate when we have organs of public security acting in a very violent context where the means are not adequate. There's people that are using long weapons, and public security don't have this type of weapons. So then there's need to verify that they exist. So we have this idea that the civilian has a rifle. This is a weapon that is exclusive. The fact that they have a weapon like this in their hands in the legal framework of public security should be regulated. So there's more questions than answers, than solutions. So I want you to know that this new trend of armed conflicts, we need to make the law legitimate. There's a situation that is a scenario that is appearing. We have here some pictures from the war of Iraq. These are scenarios of armed conflict and a picture of an operation of the guarantee of the law in Rio de Janeiro. In these images, I found these coincidences. The scenarios are similar. It means in a police operation, it is really, for example, an infantry operation. The scenarios are similar, the military techniques are similar, but the legal framework is completely different. So what happens in this transition area, which are like which is a gray area, then we need to have a predominance. So when public force is used in the armed when do we use armed forces in public forces? So what is the question? Who is the civilian that needs to be protected? What is the legal framework applicable? The civilian is being protected by security, or are they on the contrary side? They're defending the criminal activities. So if we are in a police operation, this principle of humanitarian rights as principles from this conclusion,
principle,
what is the
which is a
configuration of the situation?
configuration to have a framework both for the decision maker at the political level and as well as for the operator. The conclusions to brings more concerns and questions. We see the outlook of the credible situation. It's a transition of a public operation on the side of the investigation of violence and intensity of violence. We see the paradoxes of placing police forces as though they were the armed forces, and all the armed forces and so they use sometimes the public forces to bring adequate classification which is necessary for security to make motivation of positioning. Who is the authority that needs to be brought into this conflict? In the case there is one having the command of the empty spaces, authorities, the state authority, and authorities de facto. Many times is somebody who's being oppressed by someone. And so we make a comparison in other scenarios. For example, the territoriality, and we place the armed forces in an area that is probably necessary for a local inhabitant. We ask if their permanence guarantees their security, they may say yes, but it's a question of bringing legitimacy of armed forces and delegitimize the state. And this goes the vacuum of sovereignty is where we see that in view of the armed forces. This is not adequate to have a rescue operation assigned only for political issue. We place an example is Rio de Janeiro, the police forces that are highly trained with a high combat power and authority. And we give this scenario as an example. The actor acts besides the role of public security. With this, I close the demonstration of legitimacy of the use of force, which is indispensable and is done precisely to this new parametrization and classification of the scenarios that could bring efficient responses, and security is critical at the political level and also for the operators at the tactical level. So we hope that this will evolve in our countries with whom we owe ourselves to serve among ourselves. A military, our commitment is to defend our country even with the sacrifice of our own life, if that would be necessary in order to save lives. And the forces of the paradigm of being inadequate is so the paradigm, if not having the adequate paradigm, but the use of forces is confusing, it's complex. So I would like to share this. Thank you very much for allowing me to share. Thank you very much for giving us so much information. Thank you very much for your effort. And I would like to say something that is important, that more than the responsibilities that you could have at the security level and defense level is fundamental to be clear with the legal framework under which it's acting. And the commanders have play a very determining role because it's not only the risk of the civil population with whom we are obliged to protect, but also all of the members that make up our forces. Thank you so much. And please, Ana Luisa, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Aquellos que nos
Thank you
siguen en
very
línea,
much.
más de 20,000
And
personas. A los
I
asistentes
know there's more than 1,000 persons
presentes de
online, and
clase
there
65.
is many representatives of Class 65.
Juan Carlos
And
Rojas,
precisely
la
what
pauta
Carlos
para el
just
comienzo de
mentioned to give
presentación. Y
the
aprovecho para llamar
the
la atención
way to make
también
my
que es
presentation, I take advantage to
momento
call your
de prestar
attention to
atención mucha
it's a
más
moment to
ahora,
pay greater
porque
attention, much
finalmente,
more
aunque
so now, because
es un panel que habla de la
although this is a
protección
panel
de
that
las
talks
personas
about
civiles,
protection of the
también tiene
civilian
un impacto
and
fundamental
also a
tanto en la
fundamental
realidad como en los
impact both in
desafíos
reality as
en
well
las
as in the
operaciones militares
challenges
actuales.
and for the
Quiero
current
rápidamente, en este
operations.
momento,
But at this point in time, if if they exist, the challenges for the enforcement of the international humanitarian law, where they have located gray zones and hybrid wars. And so this concept indicates that hybrid wars means situations that arise from natural issues. I'm convinced that if currently I would open the microphones about if this hybrid war or what is a hybrid war, I would have more examples and diverse denominations from each one of the participants. Hybrid war is a technical concept, a theoretical concept. Currently, there is currently no consensus about what is really the hybrid war, and there is a response to try to see the realities and what exists currently and generate challenges for international security. What does that hybrid situation refers to? It refers to the means and mechanisms for operations. We are talking about the continuations on the mortars where they use traditional weapons and also the appearance of other means of attack we have already talked about, and it has also been mentioned here about the surge of artificial intelligence. And we're talking about Semitic and non-Semitic uh, areas, and we're talking about actors that can only not only the armed forces, not only the civil population, but many times different governments use these concepts to also talk about. And there's also the situation that we're talking about something hybrid, about the effect. The effects can be fatal, it can be material, the civilian infrastructure as a possible emotional, psychological harm and damage, and the threats, erroneous information, disinformation, and could have effects not only in operations and civilian operations, but also in humanitarian assistance, a modality where these wars are carried out on. It could be open operations, could be undercover operations, and also the hybrid modality affects different areas, as I was mentioning, the civilian infrastructure, but also technological infrastructure that supply energy, potable water, not only to military infrastructure objectives, but particularly to civilian infrastructure. So, what are these hybrid wars generate? Is a gray areas, these gray areas where the difficulty sometimes is to distinguish if we are before an armed conflict or other type of situations that has already been talked about by the ICRC, and that are not able to only see in an armed conflict the situation, and as Juan Carlos was mentioning when I introduced my words, the important thing is to identify the legal applicable framework. So you will see on your screen some images that are as an illustration purpose without effect to pointing out a, a specific country. There are, do these gray zones exist where you do not know what's going on and what is the applicable law? Because many times they can respond to an environment that is not like a geopolitical plateau, but it also influences on social issues, cultural issues, and also technological. Now, when we prepared this topic, I was thinking what are the notions or determine these civil wars. They participate many times, governments or political groups or mass media. So, what are the rules that apply to the execution of military operation. I was thinking that many of the persons online were listening on and the persons who were present, I saw there was a film, Eyes in the Sky, and represents very graphically that many times it's not the law that's involved in these types of operations. There's two very clear images of that film. Anybody who hasn't seen it, you should, because it can give way to great analysis where one of the advisors that is present in that film and is defining if they're going to carry out or not an attack following the precautionary principles and proportionality principles makes a pronouncement and says, I prefer that a non-armed group at this time classified by Hollywood as be responsible of the death of thousands of persons and know that the government of a country, at least in that film, be responsible of having authorized a girl to go. How many times the political issues are absolutely presentable and important? And the second is what I was saying, the viral part of where with all the political, economic, cultural, and of nationality and race policies, the one that is playing the role of the Minister of Defense tells his advisor never tell a soldier that he does not know the costs of a war because it happens with these. Uh, this is why these hybrid wars occur. Why is it important? Why is this a topic so relevant? Because this presents humanitarian issues, ethical, as I heard in a presentation, and going to be the humans, a government that becomes responsible what's occurring. And it also has a legal challenges. It is talked about, and this is one of the questions that arose during the first panel, if there is adequate regulation or not to, to respond to technology and artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons, which are out there at this point in time, and also the humanitarian concerns and the displacement affectation to fundamental rights such as life or the integrity of life. There's also challenges and security, and that uh, it's the responsibility of the armed forces and the security forces. These can have affectations to the civilians and combatants, but also to the authorities, if even if it's not an armed conflict. This has a real conflict because there's a lack of clarity of the scenarios, lack of identification in the applicable legal framework. It could have direct repercussions. The ICRC talks a lot about the trust in the legitimacy and the professional life and private life of all of those persons in charge of lending security or giving security and seeing for the security of the countries. And besides all those concepts, they present diffuse and a- old of realities. And I'm already seeing the timer, but all of this you have to contextualize it in the operational realities that exist today, both in the human rights area. And I think that most of you who are listening are living under and is the different the support from military forces in legal security issues and talk about the participation of military and security operations and that talk about the dynamics of the context of multiplicity of actors talking in terms of Latin American of gang cartels and it's all the realities that are challenging not only the legal framework but also the capacities of the police forces and the multiple humanitarian consequences. We have countries in Latin America with a great number of disappeared persons, and these could be a higher number that exists in armed conflicts, that many of these confrontations are being registered in areas generating different impacts and consequences. This is to talk about the area of designations. But if I go to the armed conflicts, currently they have greater affectations on civil population than in combatant, as it occurred in the First and Second World War. Humanitarian concerns, as I mentioned, there's already intercontinental networks and supply chains that directly affect the civil population. That means that the advance or the progress of technology is not only important for the law, but also for the reality as such, and because of the confidentiality with which these are managed, many times it's very difficult to give a scope or to give the adequate legal framework and specific framework. So, which is the applicable law and these types of operations? What are the authorities of the armed forces and security forces? What are their limitations? What is that thin line where the legitimacy can be placed in place? This is a very traditional structure, and this is very clear. The conventions of Geneva, and when it's an armed conflict, be it international or national, and the rules of rules and regulation of human rights when it's different types of violent situations. We do have to identify what are the applicable regulations, both in combat and in public security, because it presents many challenges for operations. As I was mentioning at the beginning, challenges from the moment of the planning up to the conduction of operations, challenges and the delimitation of the program, the analysis of the mission, and the evaluation of factors, and the assessment of courses of action, and in decision making, challenges also in the coordination and communications, civil military communication, the use of decision, and the use of certain tactics and means, and that represent our armed forces in having equipment all for public security, when the genuine nature of the armed forces is to participate in armed conflict situations where it is and should be the first resources in the conduction of operations, as I mentioned. And what position does the ICRC have before a situation like this? The ICRC, as has been recognized, and the nations that have were all signatories of the Convention of Geneva, to be the guardian of international humanitarian law, and ICRC sustains and continues to sustain that all these issues, there is applicable a law that has a solid and decisive framework about the reality on the terrain. And this is, my predecessor was saying, it's very clear when it's a confrontation or hostile activities or attacks against states. We're talking about wars, and the first recognized forms of recognized by international humanitarian law. What legal framework applies and the additional protocols. But when we're talking about an internal conflict, a non-state with a state or among state, and the of, of IADB, we have to make an analysis on the terrain. It's a very detailed analysis, which is the intensity of the violence and the level of organization. In uh, previous slides, there's a series of factors that need to be analyzed. The, the type of caliber of the weapons, and the type of the confrontations, and the scope of the and different delimitation of the problem, and the same results in the organization. There is a capacity of transmission, there is training centers on the part of these armed groups, and it's not easy. One of the qualifications of this nature is not easy because one has to assess the behavior of each one of the groups involved. And you will agree with me that we have here, and I insist on your hearing online, representatives from many different countries. Who is the one that provides the weapons and who carries out the investigations? So where are they training? For example, in Mexico, they talk about the cartels topics, how many are being made up of, and what is the function that each one of these cells carrying out. And so currently there is no single authority responsible to make the classification of those conflicts. The ICRC makes it as a guardian of international humanitarian law and also has the responsibility to remind the states the compliance of the applicable legal framework is when it seems or not applicable. All of these situations or these realities, or as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the rights and operations go on different roads, or that the reality is going a step further than the law. What I consider is that the law is clear. Effectively, there are many spectrums that we need to continue seeing, but it's more the current reality that is elucidating that frailty of the legal framework. And I'm going to refer to what the professor said. It's not only to talk and develop a topic that has been provided, but to give ideas for reflection. It is important both in human rights and also in the international humanitarian law to visualize the good practices and successes that the compliance of the law has had. The reality sometimes surpasses if on top of these current violations that we see as we're so flagrant to international humanitarian law and human rights and the contemporaneous conflicts and violent situations that surpass many times what one has imagined, and imagine not only for the police forces and armed forces that have been working on, and the with the time that I have, ICRC has launched a world initiative to work on the international humanitarian law. I shall leave you in this presentation, but this world initiative is to invite all of the states to assume as a political commitment the debates over the applicability and observance of international humanitarian law. These terminologies are the gray zone, and it shouldn't surpass and not be placed over the legal certainty and reality, which is necessary to continue seeing, but it gives a certainty, a legal certainty, both for the application of the armed forces and security forces and also the civilian population that they are obliged to uh, to respond to. The comments are very important. We hope that there will be many questions with regards to this topic. As Ana Luisa states, the problem here is not legal. It is absolutely clear, transparent, and it's specific, it's pragmatic. But there are realities, operational realities, and political realities. And thinking on you as commanders, as leaders, is how that principle of equality is practiced in the best possible manner so that this exercise of the use of force is so necessary and minimizes the effects on the persons who have no participation in these situations. To close this panel, we shall give the floor to Colonel Novoa, who's going to talk about a current topic and a very concerning topic because there is a social protest. It's a constitutional right. In most of the countries, the people have the right to protest, but unfortunately, and with more frequency, we are seeing how this right is being turned into a chaos and is used to go further than what the law mentions. Colonel Novoa, I hope you're listening in, and the microphone is yours for 20 minutes. Good morning, General, and good morning for the panel members and the auditory. And I am going to make a presentation on my screen.
Ya no estamos viendo la presentación. ¿La podemos presentar acá nosotros? Si quiere mi coronel, nosotros desde acá la...
Colonel,
Si continúa con la publicación, sigan por ahí. Por favor, comparta pantalla.
please share your screen. Otherwise, we have your presentation here. We can place it. Tell me if you have any difficulty. Otherwise, we can share your screen for you.
Bueno, por favor, si vamos pasándola ya porque no permitió abrir aquí.
It didn't allow me to open it here.
Ok, ya la tenemos acá.
We have it here.
Ya puede comenzar, mi coronel. Está puesta
You
la
can start,
primera-
Colonel. The first
Muy buenos
slide
días.
is on.
Reitero el saludo
Okay,
para
good
los
morning.
integrantes de
So,
la clase
hello
65,
again to all the members
Sí.
of class of 65.
que la mejor fue la 47. Sí, soy
The best one was the 47 class
americano de defensa. Bueno, yo quiero
from the
hacer
IADB.
una
I want to
reflexión y
make
brevemente
this
también
a
invitarlos a
reflection
ustedes para
and
que reflexionemos sobre
to
las
invite you to
situaciones
reflect
fácticas
on these factic
jurídicas que
situations and
obviamente
legal
han afectado
situations that
tanto
have
en nuestro hemisferio
occurred in our
y
hemisphere
otras
as
latitudes
well as in other
y en
latitudes
muchos países que
and in
obviamente
several
tienen
countries
dificultades
that have had
frente a
difficulties
un
facing
tema tan crucial y
a topic
de
that is
actualidad
so
como es el tema de la
crucial,
protesta
such
social.
as social
Creo que en la intervención
protests
anterior nos
topic,
dieron los
such as
elementos para
this
facilitar
topic.
esta conversación
And so
clara
the
con
other
todos
presentations
ustedes.
gave us the basis to
Porque al
start this
hablar de los
conversation with you,
conflictos
because when
híbridos
talking
debemos
about
hablar de las
hybrid conflicts, we
realidades de
have to
nuestros
talk about
países y
the
particularmente
realities of
Colombia.
our countries, and in
Está
particular
habiendo
Colombia.
conflictos
There
híbridos
are
que
hybrid
mencionan la confrontación entre
conflicts
fuerza
whenever
pública
there's
del Estado
confrontations
con
between the public force of the state against also
delincuenciales,
criminal
pero también
organizations, but
con
also
grupos
with
denominados
groups
supuestamente
called
subversivos a los cuales se le aplica
subversive
igualmente el
groups,
derecho internacional humanitario.
which
La siguiente.
humanitarian international law is applicable to
Bueno,
them.
frente a los retos
So
y
facing these challenges
desafíos que tenemos,
that we
creo
have,
que es importante,
it is
siguiente, por favor,
important,
tener
next
en
slide,
cuenta
to
algo
keep into account
que
something
expresó en su momento Kofi Annan y que
that
tiene
was
que ver
expressed
con
by Kofi Annan, and that it
temas
has to
de
do
seguridad
with
y desarrollo.
topics
Kofi Annan
of
expresó algo en su
security and
momento que es tan
development. Kofi
válido
Annan
hoy en día,
expressed
y es
something
que
that
no
is so
hay seguridad sin
valid these
desarrollo,
days is
no hay
that
desarrollo sin
there's no
seguridad,
security
y
without
no puede
development,
haber
and there's no
ninguna
development
de
without
las dos
security,
si no
and
se
the two
respetan
of
los
them
derechos humanos.
cannot
Esto
happen
es
if human rights are
siempre
not being
reitero
respected. I think
también
that
que
this is something very,
tiene que ver con lo que está ocurriendo actualmente en
so it has to do with what is
países.
happening currently in our
Traigo a
countries.
colación esta frase de Kofi Annan porque
So I
tiene
bring this
que ver con
phrase
las
up
reflexiones
because I think it has
preguntas
to
que
do
quiero
with
hacerles
the
a continuación.
reflections
Siguiente, por
and
favor.
statements I want to do next.
Bueno, yo hago aquí alusión a
Here,
los hechos del
I am
2011,
referring to
particularmente en el
what happened in
Medio Oriente,
2011 in the Middle East,
donde
when there was an uprising against authoritarian regimes that were putting obstacles to the human rights, and also the respective governments were putting an obstacle for access to services and also to human rights. The Arab Spring has three very specific things, like there were reforms such as political reforms, and also economic reforms. So then it is an international instrument that is good to keep into account that there were implications socially, culturally, and it needs to be a reference for planning the police service as well as national security and the activities that are being developed by the military units. The Arab Spring has problems that need to be solved by political and administrative authorities so that there's no military intervention or police intervention. I think this is a point of reference that is very important. These are rights that are economic, public, and social, which are causing these uprisings, such as in the Middle East. And in Latin America, we had this domino effect of the Arab Spring. The UN Program for Development from 2019 to 2023 says that in Latin America and in the Caribbean, there has been an increase of social protests of 31.5%. This means that we went from 18,000 protests to 24,371. So it means that it's still an increase, this topic of social protests, and this needs to be a reason of analysis and reference to look at how the operational doctrine of military forces as well as of the police agrees with the rights that people are reclaiming. In Latin America, we're talking about the insatisfaction with the governments due to political restricted rights and economical crises, as well as inequality, as well as the topic of basic services, access to basic services. On the screen, we have a report, and the reason why we're looking at this report is to make you see the trend, the employment of the force and the violences that some people that are not doing this, practicing the right of protest in accordance with the laws. So this is called lethality in disguise. So it is talking about the impact of the use of non-lethal weapons used by the police. And it says that more than since 2015, there were 120,000 people wounded by police in protests. And there's the number of people that died due to inhaling gases, and there's people also who died with rubber bullets. And this is something that we can see this repeatedly. It's a pattern, and then this needs to be an object of analysis to improve the tactical doctrine. Here we have the report of the UN on human rights about Chile. This is from the academic point of view, with all due respect from our brothers from Chile, but we need to see what has been published by international entities, and one can reflect to what other panelists have mentioned. How does the state guarantee the right to life and personal integrity of the people who are participating in the protest? Because these are very concerning numbers: 26 people dead, 4,903 wounded, 2,700 were police officers. So And this was supposed to be a peaceful protest. And this is very recurrent in the police in the continent, this topic of torture and also gender violence and social violence, which is sexual violence, which is something very concerning in Colombia. We've been working on this, but it also mentions also arbitrary detention. So then how do we use these measures of detainment for public protests? And sometimes it has to do with economic issues. The uprising of the prices of the public transportation generated protests in society. So what are the political guidelines? What are the spaces for dialogue so that we don't get to confrontation mechanisms? Next, please. Then in the next slide, we're looking at the case of Ecuador in 2019, and the experts from the UN also did an analysis, and we're looking here the right to human life, the right to freedom of rights contemplated in Article 4, the right to life from the Commission of Human Rights, and arbitrary detention on number 7, which are instruments that our countries in the hemisphere particularly are obligated to comply with. There's also a problem related with economical and cultural rights, and it has to do with the increase in gas prices. And so there's definitely a trend. It is like an obligation under the principle of progressiveness, and it is something that we need to analyze and look at in our academies. This is the Colombian case. Also, the rights that I already mentioned were also affected, and there were a lot of police officers that were wounded. And this implies that there was violence and that there were obviously situations outside of the law. And also there's eye injuries, which is recurrent, and also the detention under administrative measures. So the UN called to facilitate the free access of food, resources, and medical missions, and this is going to be mentioned afterwards. Let's look at the challenges facing the legal framework. Here, we need to reflect to see what tools we can improve to facilitate that the social protests are really a pacific instrument, a peaceful instrument, and as the Commission on Human Rights mentions. The first that one has to say about this is that the public service should be at the service of people, and that this is developed, public power needs to be on the service of the people. And this is in Article 1 on the Human Rights Commission. And it talks about the respect and guaranteeing human rights of all people without any type of discrimination. So in this context that I have presented, if one has a question, then what has happened? Why haven't we guaranteed fully the exercise of this right to protest when it is contemplated within the framework of human rights in the American Commission of Human Rights, Inter-American? And so it talks about respect, the authorities, of what authorities cannot do, but also the obligations of that which they must do. And this document of the Commission talks about the guarantees as a principle, and it has to do with the development of norms, constitutional, administrative, or internal norms in the military institutions or police institutions to make these rights become effective.
El derecho a protestar es un
The right to
derecho
protest
que comporta la manifestación
is a right that has to do with
colectiva,
individual
mostrar
expression or
desacuerdos para tener
collective
garantía de
expression
derechos,
to express
para
their
condenar actos de
inconformity, to
corrupción o para
condemn
condenar
acts of
actos
corruption or
cuales
to
el
condemn
Estado o los
acts
gobiernos han
in which
violentado los
the
derechos humanos.
governments have
Este derecho
violated
está
human rights.
la
And this
normativa
right is contemplated
internacional,
in
que es a
the
donde
international
quiero
norms,
llegar.
which is
Y
where I want to
ese
get
derecho se
to.
reconoce como un
And
derecho de
this
reunión
right is
pacífica y sin
recognized
armas,
as
que comporta
a
tres
peaceful
derechos
meeting without
que
weapons.
se
And there's
conjugan
3 rights
en lo
that
que
are
llamamos normalmente la
combined
protesta social, que es el
in
derecho
social protests.
de
It is the
expresión,
right
la libertad de
of
expresión,
expression, the
el
freedom of
derecho de
expression,
asociación y el
and the
derecho de
freedom
reunión.
of association
Estos
and
tres
freedom of
derechos
meeting.
en la
And these
jurisprudencia
3
del sistema
rights in the
interamericano lo que se denomina el derecho
legal section of the American
Siguiente
system
punto.
is the right to protest. Next.
El uso de la fuerza.
The
El uso de
use
la
of
fuerza,
force. The use
está
of
determinado
force is
para el caso
determined
de esta
for the
intervención
case of
frente a lo que
this intervention
la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos
based on what the
ha
Inter-American
entregado
Court
en
of
su
Human
jurisprudencia.
Rights has
Y habla de tres
delivered.
principios
And
puntuales.
it talks about
El
3 main
principio de
principles,
legalidad,
which
el
are the
principio
legality
de necesidad,
principle, the
como
need
principios básicos para
principle,
que los agentes
as
del Estado
basic principles so that the agents of the
empleen
state
bien
can
sean los
employ
elementos o las armas que
the
el Estado les
elements or
entrega,
the
pero
weapons
bajo esas
that
triadas,
the state
quien
is delivering,
emplea las
but
bajo
who
esa
is
triada, pues
using
obviamente tiene la
them,
garantía
they have
de que
the
está
guarantee that
ejerciendo
they are
el poder del Estado de manera
doing
legal
the
y
power
obviamente
of the
legítima,
state
como
in a
lo
legal and
una de las
legitimate
personas
way,
que intervenía anteriormente.
as was
Debe haber
mentioned
un
before.
marco legal que establezca
So there needs to
el
be a legal
objetivo para el
framework
cual
that establishes the
las entidades
objective
y los agentes estatales emplean la fuerza o
to
los armas de fuego
express
y
why
obviamente
the
el
weapons are
principio
being
de
used,
necesidad que
and
está
the
muy
need
conectado
principle,
con
which is
el artículo 2 y
connected
3
to
del Código de
Article
Ética para los funcionarios
3
encargados de
of
hacer cumplir la ley. Esto es
for
el respeto y
officers
garantía
who
de
are
los
in
derechos
charge
humanos,
of
pero
making the law,
también la necesidad
of complying with the
excepcional de
law,
emplear
and
la
also the
fuerza
exceptional law of
han
employing
agotado
force
medios
if the
pacíficos o de diálogo y
peaceful
estos no han
means
dado
or dialogue
resultado,
means
se
have been
aplica la
exhausted,
fuerza obviamente
then of
empleando
course the
medios
force can be
no letales.
applicable
Y la
using non-lethal
proporcionalidad tiene que ver
methods, and the
obviamente con lo que dice la
proportionality
Corte
has to
Interamericana
do
de
with,
Derechos Humanos,
as the Commission of Human Rights
conveniencia
says,
y la
with the
progresividad
degree and the
de la fuerza que
progress
emplee el
of the
agente estatal
force that the
para
state
reducir
agent
obviamente la
is
amenaza,
applying to
teniendo en cuenta
reduce the
también
threat, taking into
de alguna
account
manera la
somehow
cooperación que la
the
persona que está siendo
cooperation
sometida
that the
exprese,
person
lo que indicaría
that
un
is
periodo
expressed by the person,
más o menos
which
alto de la
this would
fuerza
mean
en
a
función
more or
del
less
procedimiento que se realice. Aquí hay
application of the
diferencias muy
force.
importantes. Está el caso de los hermanos
Here, for example, we have the
de una
case
sentencia de la
of
Corte Interamericana
these
donde estos
brothers,
tres principios se desarrollan de manera muy
and these
importante
3
para
principles are
tenerlos
being
en cuenta,
developed
obviamente,
to be
en
taken
la
into
aplicación
account
de
in
la
the
zona operativa
application
definitiva,
of the
tanto de las fuerzas
doctrine
militares como de la Policía
of the
Nacional.
military
Siguiente, por
forces
favor.
as well as the national police. Colonel, you only have 3 minutes so that you can have your
Bueno,
conclusion.
yo les mencionaba que
I was mentioning that
quisiera que reflexionáramos
I
frente
would
a
like us to reflect
situaciones o elementos
on
fácticos o cosas que puedan
situations
mejorar.
or factic
El artículo 15
things that
de
can
la
be
Convención
improved. On
Americana de
Article
Derechos Humanos
15
es
of the
un artículo
Commission,
bien
the American
importante
Commission
en
of
el
Human
marco de la
Rights,
atención a la protesta
is very
social, porque
important
se
for
reconoce el
social
derecho de reunión
protests
pacífica
because
y sin
we
armas.
are
Creo que es el
recognizing the
instrumento
right to
internacional
meet
más puntual.
in peace
No
and without
obstante, lo
weapons.
siguiente,
This is very specific. Next.
en la siguiente ayuda, pues uno diría, bueno,
Then one would say, well, the Molotov bombs and also stones or arrows, as some indigenous communities are using, these are weapons that are being used for social protests. This is the woman of a police officer who was set on fire, and the response was, well, what do we do about it? Next.
Tenemos otro instrumento que es casi similar, que es
We
el
have another
artículo
similar instrument,
21 del
which is
Pacto
Article
Internacional de Derechos
21
Civiles y
of
Políticos,
the
que
International
reconoce el
Pact
derecho de
of
reunión pacífica.
civil and political rights. So then what is the reflection that I'm leaving you with these two instruments? In Article 15 of the Commission of Human Rights, we're talking about the right to meet peacefully without weapons. And the question is, we need to think about the power that the the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has, particularly the Commission in Article 62 talks about that the court can interpret instruments and the articles of the convention. And we need to see how the court is interpreting that article of meeting peacefully without weapons, documenting what has happened in the continent where there's obviously been aggression against the public forces. And in Article 21 of the pact, it says, I think that it would be good to have an exchange with the committee of the pact to look at this observation. And this is observation number 37. And then number 15, it says the right to meet peacefully. And it says there that you cannot apply violence, physical force against people to cause injuries or to damage goods, private goods. Next. Number 85 of observation 37 says that whenever there is a blockage of traffic for a long time, and this affects the rights of other people, and this is sustained and long for a long time, even though there is the right to meet peacefully, you can definitely lift this blockage, eliminate this blockage, and we have some huge challenges. There's a big legal work that needs to be done between those who are in the hemisphere. Next, please. And number 90 talks about something very important that has to do with command and control. The state needs to investigate peacefully and timely any other reports on violations that happen during protests. And sometimes the communities need to have this in a timely and quick manner. And I want to mention here a very particular case, which is the case of George Floyd. In the case of George Floyd, which is a very well-known case, there was an excessive use of the force, which caused the death of him, and there were disorders. There was chaos in Minnesota and in New York. And the national judges compensated the family of George Floyd with 27 million, and 200 people who protested and who were overrun by the police, they received a compensation of $21,500. So then the judges, the United States judges, applied the control of conventionality. This means that the doctrine and legality goes to national courts in order to provide a response, to make justice and to guarantee the human rights of people. Thank you, Colonel. Please, we need a conclusion. Then, based on the question of applying human rights, we have the Colombian case, which is the case of Palmeras versus Colombia, where the humanitarian international law was applied. And this is a tool that we have used. I think that it's something that we need. There's a demand that obligates people to generate rights of protest. They need to be dialogue in order to avoid this. There's a norm framework that we need to examine We need to examine the educational doctrine of our forces, also prevention, investigation, and also we need to repair and explore the tools that I've just mentioned, the opinion of the Inter-American Court in Article 15, the right to meet peacefully without weapons, and Article 21 of the Pact. In Observation 37, it also mentions there the right to meet peacefully. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel. Truly, this topic needs more time. I'm sorry that we didn't have that much time. We only have 10 more minutes, so we're going to take advantage of these 10 minutes with the questions that we have gotten from the people who are following this seminar virtually. So I'm going to Colonel Betancourt. Two for Ana Luisa and two for Colonel Novoa. So please, just 3 minutes each, answer the questions and close with your ideas that you want to leave here in the auditorium. So for Colonel Betancourt from Ecuador, there's the question: in an armed conflict or international conflict, as the case of Ecuador, the hard nucleus was inclined to apply human international law. So how do we face this in a balanced scenario? The second one says.
The second question says is what regulation should we apply in the asymmetric war if the enemy uses modern weapons such as drones, and the third is how to avoid. Oh, we only have those two. For Ana Luisa, what is the position of the International Committee of the Red Cross in the face of militarization, the use of public forces in rehabilitation centers taken by mafias in Latin American countries? And the second question that comes from Mexico, considering the graphic over the applicable law and practice, how do you see the limits between international humanitarian law, human rights, in the context of violence, where there is no formal declaration of armed conflict, but yes, systematic violations of human rights? And for Colonel Novova, two questions from a from your point of view. What actions should the commander take in case of a protest that uses illegal weapons against the public forces? And the second is, if you can uh, give us one or two successful examples as regards as means and methods used by some public force to minimize violence in social uh, chaotic or violent protests. So we shall start with Colonel. Thank you. Is in the Ecuador case, Ecuador has a recognition on the part of the object, and it was a paradigm was given on the use of force for armed conflicts. In this case, the hard nucleus brings double security. It is enforced during the period of human rights, and when it has declaration of armed forces that is applicable within humanitarian laws, there is a right that has common regulations or standards that can be placed applicable and forced in case of armed conflicts. There is the objective and the use of lethal force to see of if there is a modification of the scenario, which is not a paradigm of armed forces. These rules are established in a way to compare this change. New formulated issues enter on the paradigms of use of lethal power and law and order. And when we use the use of drones in a violent situation, we saw a police operation, the opposing or criminals used the flying objects, and the public order cannot use helicopters, so there's a proportionality of the opponent to the state forces, and there's a convenience of using a more applicable weapon for both sides. When one uses, in one sense, the response is not that good. So we have to have equality in that sense in using the same type of weaponing. That is my participation. Thank you. Ana Luisa, regarding the first question, the posture of the International Committee for Withdrawals, regarding the participation of security forces in detention centers, I can say that finally, this is a response on the part of the states. The ICRC should not have to realize a pronouncement about the situation of the denominated militarization. What it is going to do is always accompany those forces, legitimated forces that carry out illicit activities to face these lethal situations. So we're going to use these through training, and when it is possible to be there and present. The ICRC is supporting the forces that are carrying out these functions, whichever they are. And regarding the limits and suggestion of applicable law in a violent situation, it has prolonged and caused many humanitarian consequences and many challenges for public security. The answer could be not too popular, but I would say, and uh, to try to bring out all the values that distinguish the armed forces and the public forces, and go work on the respectfully on the legal mandate and the service that we know that many times it means sacrifice, means many efforts, and remind you that in your nation, in the battlefield, you recognize, understand, value, and think is many times is when it works when we like to apply armed conflict standards, and when we see in the law is the enforcement of human rights. Otherwise, it shall not continue to be easy because our armed forces are going on the transition to what I think many times this is like a short circuit because the armed forces are prepared for war and to save the sovereignty. And currently, there's many operations that are occurring that don't necessarily respond to that vocation. And a final thought to close my participation in this panel. And it's like the colleague said, we're all responsible, but I'm also aiming at my thoughts to commanders, where the training, experience, and capabilities many times is the same or higher than those of us who see that topic from the academia or the studies to sustain the enforce of if somebody can maintain the existence and the capacity and enforce though, because it's you who allow us to have hold the positions, because it's hybrid wars and is violence that is affecting the humanitarian assistance organizations that you have to fulfill the mission, but not at any price, not a price of causing harm to the civilian population uh, because of the price of taking care of the your physical pres- participation. And this assistance of the ICRC what it seeks is the contemporaneous issues is that the law continues to be enforced. Thank you very much, Ana Luisa, for your thoughts. And I give the floor to Colonel Novoa to also, uh, in 3 minutes, make reflections to answer the question. Thank you very much, General. I think the question that what action should a commander take when they're in the framework of a protest and they see that they are using lethal force? I mentioned that the state is responsible in the respect the guarantee of the life of the civil population. As Ana Luisa said, when we're talking to officers who have the capacity to conduct them in a strategic manner. When I talked about the principle and the use of force, which is of the Inter-American Legal Court, first of all, a legal framework that indicates what I can do within the framework of the Constitution, the law, and the international agreements, and as regards the human rights and international humanitarian law. These have to be in the doctrine that they operate tactically, and I would indicate that we have to keep in mind the basic principles to use of firearms that indicates when the life of an official is at a threat or a third person that we're protecting. Obviously, the use of lethal force is to attend when attend the uh, social protests. They have to have preventive methods. There's less lethal weapons to be activated in the case it occurs, and it should be the responsibility of, or it has to be the responsibility of the commander of the operational unit. But it's important to impose Principle 9, which is a rule of gold to use little force. I mentioned this because there's a responsibility both with the police and when we intervene in these types of situations because we decide over the life, the freedom, and integrity of the persons. These are three rights, and these mean legal capacity and tactical capacity, obviously, to respond to the situations that are presented, but also to um, render accounts. And regarding the second question, the means and methods to minimize violent protests, I would like to say that with our experience in 2021, the police established the Office of the Police, and we also carried out the creation of education of the National Police with the accompaniment of the Human Rights UN Office, and this brought us to establish protocols to see how we could establish dialogue with civil situation. Nowadays, in the intervention of a violent protest, a dialogue unit is totally prepared and comes with the support from the Human Rights Commissioner office, and also the office has seats in 52 units of the police throughout the country, and the uh, the actions with the civil population and talking to them, we have been able to dismount violence acts, and we seek for consultation groups to sit down and talk. And there's the experiences that I can mention as part of the respect to human rights within the country of Colombia. Thank you very much, Colonel Novoa. And with this, we close the cycle of questions and answers with those of you who accompany us virtually, and I give the floor to our Master of Ceremonies to thank the speakers and the moderators for this excellent seminar, and also thank the more than 20,000 persons that followed us to different areas, the class of 65. And I also would like to mention the next seminar that will be carried out on November 28, 2025, by virtual mode, is a seminar of prevention and response to disaster. lessons learned and good practices of the international cooperation for humanitarian assistance. To continue, I would like to invite Mr. Reinaldo Salgado Piato, Director General of the Secretariat of the IADB, to give his words of appreciation.
Senhor Almirante Puntel, Ministro do Superior Tribunal Militar do Brasil, demais autoridades já nominadas, senhoras e senhores, estimados participantes,
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants, panelists, students of Class 65, good afternoon. A special greeting to more than the 7,000 persons registered from the different countries. It is a great satisfaction to have held a seminar of international humanitarian law and human rights. We close the date of relevant information which have been so enriching. We've had the opportunity to listen to experts, well-known experts that addressed very important topics for the enforcement of the international humanitarian law and human rights in the current context of armed conflicts. The challenges brought by different countries have been broadly discussed on human rights and the impact of technology, such as artificial intelligence, cyber information, and drones. As Secretary of the Inter-American Defense Board, and on behalf of the leadership, and especially General Villeda, President and Vice President of the Board, and General of the Inter-American Defense Board, we sincerely appreciate the members of the speakers of the panel and higher minister from Brazil and the School of Education and Perfecting of Magistrates and Military Justice, and with whom we have a very broad cooperation agreement. Mr. Perez, Dr. Marcos Notes, professor of the University of Chile, and the strategic studies, the uh, artificial intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Diaz from the Center of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, Colonel Eduardo Bitenco, professor of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law from San Remo, Italian, Dr. Ana Luisa, regional delegate for Mexico and Central America of the International Committee of Red Cross, Colonel Luis Rao of the National Police of Colombia. I also thank the organizers and collaborators that made this event possible, very especially to our moderators, Dr. Srine, Brigadier Juan Carlos, professor of the School of Technical, the Master of Ceremony, advisor of the Secretariat of the students of the class of 65, and all of everybody who has accompanied us live and later. This information will be given after this, and the agencies of international cooperation representatives from civil society to share the purpose of promoting dialogue and exchange of experiences over common challenges and cooperation between the member states and the observers of the IADB. We close sure that the information that was shared will help to bring respect to the international standards of international humanitarian law and human rights and of the public security of this country. The Inter-American Defense Force reaffirms its commitment to maintain constructive and continuous dialogue, and we look for to excellence and the comparison of the military to make a more safe and secure hemisphere. I close my words with thanking everybody. Many thanks and God bless until the next time.